I come to the same conclusion. I see 4 foot between the existing house and the first garage door, about 2 foot between the 2 garage doors, and another 4 feet on the right side. I'm
You guys know you're not supposed to scale drawings, right?
No, I understand that, there's no dimensions on this, but if that's an 8-foot door, which I'm assuming it is, if you take half of that, that's about 4 feet. So I'm uncomfortable with what we have here. I don't think there's enough information in the floor plan to actually, unless we say that you can go 21.6 on the inside, and then that is verified in some way in the site plan, because I don't think what we're looking at is accurate.
I
Well-
agree. I think the inconsistency of the line work on the drawing is making me uncomfortable for this being like an approved official document, regardless of what it scales out to. Would this if we didn't pass the site plan because of this, would it set the project back a month? They'd have to resubmit, or at least a month, at least the choice, I guess that's for you.
But yeah, if they submitted scaled drawings that showed they still needed the variance, yeah, they would have to come back here next month. If by the dimensions they're giving, I assume they've checked that, but if it were within the setbacks, then they wouldn't need to come back at all. They just get a building permit. So if the 21.6 is the necessary dimension, and this drawing is reflecting more than that, then perhaps it could fit within the setback. I don't know.
Well, my issue is that if the floor plan is accurate and the 4 foot is truly the most extreme that this design can handle, then I think we'd be fine. I'd be fine like voting on it. But if it's this elevation, there is a lot of extra space, So I'm not certain how to make a condition that this, if I say, well, staff to confirm if this is accurate, well, if it's accurate, then I don't want to necessarily approve it. I at least want to revisit the need to approve it, because I think that there is plenty of space to carve out of it.
Saying that, I'm drawing, so sorry, but if we're saying that it's aligned with the majority of the addition, then if we're drawing that line straight out, that goes into the 4 foot setback. Whereas if, I'm just looking at the line work on the drawing, if the line of the house is coming from the garage addition line, then that 4 foot works. So for me, the inconsistency of the line work here doesn't allow me to have confidence that they're asking for a 4 foot, that it looks like they might end up encroaching in what they're even asking for.
Well, or reverse is that will this actually even be able to be built? Like the current approval theoretically would say only to the 4 feet and that's it. And therefore, when you start building this and you want to build it like it's shown on that elevation, I think this is.
I'm 100% confident that we would be able to obtain the architecture and the scale of the building per a 4 foot setback requirement, regardless of what you're reading on the drawings. I've checked it and checked it and checked it 17 different times based on the problems that I've had previously. Though the drawing may not be 100% clear, I appreciate that, and I would be happy to provide larger scale drawings, 24 by 36, whatever you need to clarify. But I am 100% sure that the house is slightly skewed, so as you move back on the property, that bump out, first of all, doesn't even encroach. And then secondly, well, it may be reflected that way in the drawing, but
Well, that's what we're approving.
So when I look at this, what I see is a double garage that would be 2 feet long, 2 feet, 2 feet, right? That's what I was using. Here, 4 feet, 4 feet. Now this 4 feet is what I pulled at, obviously 3.5 feet, 6, 6, okay. So 4 plus
you can be in touch with Joyce and
Yeah.
Chris, and they will,
Probably be appropriate to continue this until whatever the next date certain is for the meeting, if that's the will of the BZA.
may have a motion to that effect, continuing BZA 2018-01.
I make the motion to continue.
Any further discussion?
Yeah.
I'd like to add one thing.
Yes.
This has taken a negative turn. I just want to say that I absolutely applaud the efforts that you're going to stay in the neighborhood, to build a home addition that works with the scale of the architecture. And every time that we get one of these applications, I'm like, oh, this is the one that I'm going to say no to. But everyone is working really hard to make these homes work for our growing families. And I think had the plan been a little tighter, I think we would have been approved tonight. So I think, and I'm seeing a lot of nodding heads. So I'm an architect. I'm held to a higher standard to put everything aligned, and so
That makes two of us.
I'm holding
But
that to you.
question for the board is, if I were to able to get a drawing to you tomorrow, would we be able to come to a conclusion sooner than later, or will we have to wait till the?
You gotta wait till March, because it's a public hearing, and we're continuing the public hearing.
Okay,
So we can't do business just by looking at something and sending in emails. We gotta do it in front of the public,
fair enough.
and that's just how we operate. So I
That's-
apologize, but it would be, when is our March meeting?
Would it be able to be approved upon condition of providing extra drawings?
Because I have some colleagues that wanna see the drawing with the correct proportions so that they can make an informed decision.
Very
Is
good.
that a fair statement?
I don't know how to make a decision if the plan, the elevation doesn't match the plan and the setback and everything else. There's multiple things that are happening all at the same time, and I'm not sure what I'm looking at.
Fair enough.
We've given you the guidance you need to come back with what we would like to see.
Very good. Thank you.
So the pending motion, any further discussion? All those in favor of continuing BZA 2018-01 March meeting, please raise your right hand. Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. We look forward to your drawing. Any other business the Board of Zoning Appeals needs to take up tonight? Yes.
To give you and turn on my mic and make sure all of your mics are on throughout the planning commission meeting so that they can hear you.
Excellent. So everybody turn on your mics. With no other business, the Board of Zoning Appeals meeting is now adjourned. Nancy, do you want to? All right.
Play musical chairs.
Actually, I made this slide over here.
You want to save this for next time?
Yeah, that's what we should do.
Okay. All right, everybody in their places? Good evening. It's the February Planning Commission meeting. Welcome. The first item of business is roll call. Would the secretary please call roll?
Melissa Brown. Present. Jim Brenneman. Gregory Wolf.
Here.
Jonathan Burkle. Patrick Linehan. Jeffrey Valentino. And Nancy Walters.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. First item of business is the approval of the Planning Commission meeting minutes from January 9th.
I should abstain, since I wasn't here on voting when we do that.
I recused myself from the one item. Do I need to abstain as well?
We won't have enough
I was gonna say,
to have a quorum if everybody abstains, right? Do you have your microphone on, Mr. Waters? Mr. Waters, do you have your microphone on?
I do now. No, again, so I would say you're not voting on the actual item itself. This is an administrative approval of minutes, so I don't see a problem with it.
And is the rest of the commission all familiar with our legal counsel, David Waters? That's here tonight, okay. All right, I'll call for a motion then.
so moved.
Thank you. Mr. Wolf, second by anyone? Burkle? Any other discussion items? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. First item of business is Meadowbrook. And who do we have here tonight? Mr. Duff.
Madam Chair, I'm gonna have to recuse myself from this one.
Okay. Just take a little walk, check out the art. Okay.
Good evening. Whoa, hot mic. Justin Duff, Van Trust, 4900 Main, Kansas City, Missouri, 64112. I'm excited to be back in front of you to talk about the Meadowbrook Inn. This will be presumably our last time that we're in front of you for final development plan for Meadowbrook. So I want to introduce a few folks that are with us tonight. Victor Buckholz with LRK, the architect, as well as Doug Oven with Phelps Engineering. So they'll be up here kind of ham and egging it with me as we go through the process. So Victor, if you want to come on up. So just to get our bearings straight, the overall master plan here for Meadowbrook, give you an idea, we're talking about this parcel right here, 54 room boutique inn with 5,000 give or take square feet of retail in it, restaurant retail, centrally located in the park on about 2 acres. And I'll go ahead and pull up the architectural plan and we can just dive into where we started. I know you guys have a full agenda tonight, so I'll save you from digging into every one of the C plans or the civil plans, but we'll go ahead and jump to the architecture, and I'll let Victor go ahead and give a walkthrough of the site plan, the architectural site plan, and then kind of on through to the elevated renderings and the perspective views. Let me get you back to the civil so we can use that one for the site plan. You want to walk through it?
Sure. So my name is Victor Buckholz with LRK Architects out of Memphis, Tennessee. Do you need my full address or anything? Is that good? 175 Toyota Plaza, Memphis, Tennessee. And so, and again, I'll just go quickly through the plan. I know you guys will ask me questions if you have any. So, as you can see from the site plan there, the building is sited really similarly from the original master planning and visioning. Pulled up tight, has got a nice proximity to the multifamily building and the auto court that's there to kind of give us a nice little urban pinch, if you will, between the two buildings. You can see, so at the corner, at the upper right corner of the building is where, again, in theory, as Justin mentioned, is that a laser pointer? Ah, lovely. Actually, I'll use that. There you go. Yeah, so in this little zone there we go, is, as Justin said, where the potential tenant would go, like a restaurant or cafe. But then the actual inn entry is here, kind of in the middle, with a porte cochere at the front, but with special paving out front to sort of set the front door. But then again, we've got sort of a lobby here that then opens up to a rear courtyard area with amenities for the guests, and then parking court as well that's surrounded by a nice landscape wall to screen from the neighbors and everything. And then you can see a pool here with a little bit of fitness down at this end, but then room keys on the on the 2 floors above, so a three floor structure. And we'll go really quickly again. Let me see if I can maneuver this. Justin, you may have a better handle on that than me. So again, on the architecture, where we feel like we're really consistent, try to consistent with the vision of the original master plan. And so have kept the idea of this sort of cottage, English Romantic architectural theme, if you will, and but with a little different twist to it. So as you can see from the rendering views there, we're really a mix of really classic building with gabled elements, picking up the stone, you can see at the porte cochere and at the base of the building, and then have gone to really kind of a classic white clapboard look with a shiplap siding with a little cove detail on the shiplap versus a square edge. So I think a nice sort of restrained detail there. This is the corner north facing the park, so you see kind of a corner balcony there. The ground floor cafe. Here you can see at the center the lobby entry as well, and then the flanking wings. This is actually going off in perspective off as it goes off at an angle there.
south.
Yeah, to the south. Maybe, yeah, go to the. So again, we try to keep the material palette very, very elegant. Again, stone at the sort of restaurant mass that would come off towards the ponds. And then here we're looking at the back of the building that faces the courtyards, but you can see the sort of central gable element coming through from the lobby.
So this is the view headed eastbound on Meadowbrook Parkway, and that structure there is kind of starts to form up the identity of the restaurant. There on the northwest corner of this structure.
So we're, again, trying to use the same sort of vernacular forms that, in the pattern of the sort of English Romantic style. And we've got a few sort of perspective snapshots as well. So this is, again, looking as if the multifamily building that's under construction is at your back, and then you're seeing down Meadowbrook Parkway here on your right, and then you're seeing the porte cochere coming in on your left. So this kind of presents sort of signature corner element with upper floor balconies as well, and then the restaurant off to the right. And the next view, I think, is from the opposite side. So again, as Justin said, coming in from the lake, you see the Meadowbrook Parkway's here on the left. You see the form of the restaurant as sort of an additive form, and then the cottage form of the inn as well.
The shape of the building allows it to kind of hug the outdoor area that would be the landscaped area that spills on down to the west. So that's the idea is to have everything centrally located around the gathering space outdoor area. I
And
think
that's sort of the highlights of the architecture. Happy to answer any questions or anything else that we need to get into.
Of the building.
Sure thing. That was, Justin, I'm sorry, I'm gonna let you do that again. One more up. There. So that's on the top there is the north elevation. Am I saying that right? No, I'm sorry, actually.
The bottom one's the north elevation.
I'm misspeaking, yeah. The bottom one is the north, yeah.
As it borders Meadowbrook Parkway.
Say that again?
So this is the north elevation bordering Meadowbrook Parkway. This is looking out to the large park area that's the 60-acre mass of the park.
site plan, you have what I think is your garage or your trash entrance.
Yep, and that is right there.
Here, let me go back to the site plan.
So that's your,
That comes off of the Meadowbrook Parkway, right? The parkway on the north elevation.
Yeah, let me zoom in here so you can get a. All right.
There we go.
There we go.
Yeah, so these are fully enclosed trash room.
center one in the elevation, or the center of the three doors?
It is those three doors, yeah,
It's the three doors.
right there. I'll go
Okay.
back.
So is there a dumpster that you're pulling out there? or-
Yes,
Okay.
it's inside.
Thank you.
And the parking spaces you have allotted for this boutique inn?
95 on site,
And there's 54 rooms?
yes.
Okay.
How many staff do you project?
You know, we're still working through that. I would imagine that, what would your guess be, Dave? Probably, I was gonna say 4 to 5, kind of as a all-in staff. There may be some floaters that come through for maintenance and/or custodial duties, but probably 4 to 5 running at a consistent basis for the inn.
Overflow parking will be out on Meadowbrook Parkway?
Yeah, should there be any need for it.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, we actually talked about that this afternoon, is most of what will be highlighted on the monument signs or on the restaurant may be another reason to submit to you guys at the end, because we just don't know exactly the feel for what the restaurant or the cafe will need. And so guessing at it would probably be wrong to just have a spot for it. So as we get a little closer with those tenants, we can come back in and show you that.
And you'll have some group space up in the upper floors? Will there be some type of meeting or?
On the main floor, there is a little meeting room right now. We're playing with really the whole, let me see your pointer, really the whole north wing of this is being programmed right now, thinking of this area as the restaurant, this area as kind of the restaurant bar as it ties in. Over here's the cafe, and really tucked in the middle is a service corridor, kitchen, and some elevators. And then around that, we currently have kind of a boardroom configuration for corporate events, retreats, folks that may host an executive retreat and that may need a boardroom. But as far as the interior goes, that's kind of the open meeting space. We like to think that the restaurant will flex a little bit to have some bigger open spaces, but right now, that's all we're planning for.
Okay. Any other questions for Mr. Duff and Mr.
Buchholz.
Buchholz? Okay. You good? Ready for a motion then? Hi. When did you sneak in? Would you like to speak on this?
Evening, I'm Chris Shires with Confluence, your planning consultant on the Meadowbrook project in general, filling in for PJ Novick. This is a pretty straightforward request. It is our staff recommendation that this plan is consistent with the approved preliminary development plan, and we have a couple of minor staff conditions of approval. And that's it.
Hey, do you want to go over those conditions for us?
One is just a carryover from the original approved preliminary development plan. We have the desire that the service vehicles, delivery vehicles,
come from the south off of 94th and Terrace, 94th Terrace and Rosewood Avenue, and that they try to avoid the peak rush hour periods, the AM rush hour and the PM rush hour. The remaining two relate back to addressing the fire department comments. They want to verify that we're meeting all their circulation needs, have the fire hydrants in the right location, that type of deal. There could be one or two tweaks on that final layout for the sprinkler riser room, the Siamese connection, the fire hydrant. So we left that open, that last condition, number 3, that they provide updated plans that address any of those staff comments, such as from the fire department.
Have one comment in our packet. So, I did not get 2 and 3,
Okay,
a written form. Oh, yeah. I'd forgotten about that. Yeah, I forgot about that. Okay. Yeah, if you would, just as a reminder, since it wasn't within the regular packet. and so
absolutely.
Public can hear.
So condition number 2, the applicant providing an auto turn analysis for the site for emergency vehicle circulation and addressing to the satisfaction of the fire marshal all emergency vehicle circulation requirements, as well as the locational requirements for fire department connection, that's for the sprinkler system, and for all fire hydrants. And then number 3, prior to issuance of any building permits, the applicant providing a revised final development plan and building elevations that address all staff comments. And we may not need revised building elevations.
Everybody understand the second 2? I have a question. We've talked about the first one about the service vehicles. Can we limit that to a specific time of day rather than just say, not during peak hours?
So the way, was that,
Well, I was asking Mr. Shires.
Okay.
Yeah.
From a technical standpoint, I think you can be very specific. It'd be my thought to just encourage us not to be too specific on that, that we use more of that encourage, endeavor, the typical AM, PM peak hour, so that we're not out there with a stopwatch saying, oh, you're right at the right time. I don't think going forward, especially on the operation like the inn, that it's going to be a big issue. It's probably more of being favorable to come from the south than coming from, definitely from the east or from the west on Meadowbrook. But I guess I would encourage that. I think that language gives the city enough teeth to kind of, if we start getting complaints, say, hey, watch it. But we sure could get more specific if that was the commission's desire.
Well, my only thought was it's within a park, and there may be children, and you have large delivery vehicles with maybe a specific soft drink company or something coming through, and I was kind of hoping maybe
Have like
we
an
could.
ice cream truck scenario.
Yeah. But to try to keep the larger vehicles out of the because it is coming right into the center of the park. So I guess that's my concern. And I don't know how those vehicles work, if they can come in before like 7 a.m.
the way we dealt with it on the other uses for this issue with the senior is that we're going to do our best to comply or manage those vendors. But there may be a new driver that we need to retrain. So it would be our goal to have those, I think our interests are aligned with having those either early morning or late evening.
Right.
But I would tend to agree with Chris in the sense that if there's an issue with a certain vendor or we're having some complaints, that we would try to do our best to address it at that time.
Well, with the senior living, you're taking them off of 94th Terrace or Rosewood, and it's just going to the south end
On
of
the
the
south
park.
side,
It's
yes.
not coming through the center of the park.
Right.
And so I guess, that's my only concern is large vehicles coming through there. So I would caution you to try to get your vendors to do early morning or late evening deliveries.
And we agree.
All right. Do I have a motion? Moved by Mr. Valentino, seconded by Mr. Burkle. Any discussion?
I have two question comments on the elevation and 3D. The north elevation and then the first of the two perspectives that was provided, there's this little pony wall maybe that's kind of,
Here?
yeah. What's that? Is that a sign? Is that?
No, it's not a sign. It's just an architectural extension of the building, just to give it a little element there. There is a thought that I think along the lines of what you're saying though, if you imagine on the plan where that wall comes out as a plane, you can see we sort of located on the plan where maybe the monumental sign might be, and we'll come back to that later, where that might, again, sort of be lined up with that across the drive in the future, but what we would come back for the signage aspect. So there would be no signage on that
So
piece.
there's
That's really
a
just an
thought
architectural.
off page.
Exactly,
okay.
that would be part of the signage submittal later, but there would be no signage on that. That's more of just an architectural detail.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Not buying it, but sure. And then on the second perspective, obviously I can't make this a requirement, but it seems like, I really like the massing of the restaurant volume. But it seems like on the portico that's on the south side kind of extends too far into your kind of stone massing walls, I guess. It seems like that it's kind of a conflict architecturally. And then also the little,
This right here?
yeah, I don't know. And then, as you're kind of coming around the corner, it seems like maybe the little brow, I like it.
This right here?
Yeah. It seems like that wants to be like a stronger elevation, and then the side maybe pulled back so that stone kind of massing really reads strong. And that's just a comment that I have.
Yeah, no, duly noted. We definitely are down to level of details and brackets and that sort of thing. So we'll definitely keep that in mind and seek to finesse those for sure.
Sure. Thank you.
Share wall. At the gable ends, are those rooms on the second floor behind there?
Yeah, so this is, this stands
Right.
proud, of course, of that plane back there. And then there's actually a flat roof, if you will.
Right.
Piece, that separates this element from the actual face of that building. So, yeah.
So
that
but those
allows
are, those
So
behind
you
that,
can sort of see that right there.
yeah, those are room windows behind that
Yes.
gable.
Yes.
Okay.
But they yeah, that makes most sense.
They're facing east.
So they'd be looking at this side of that gable. If that's what you're asking.
Yeah.
North, south, yeah, it's
Yeah.
a little turned around.
Okay. Any other questions? Ready to vote? All those in favor, raise your hand. And it looks like it's unanimous.
Thank you all.
Mr. Duff? Okay.
You need this back.
Gentlemen, the next item is a public hearing, and it's request for special use permit for Homestead Country Club. Is the applicant here? Come on up to the mic. Give us your name and address.
Good evening. My name is Dennis Holsing, and the address is 5009 West 68th Street, Prairie Village, Kansas.
And Mr. Holsing, you want to wait just a minute until we get our secretary back?
What's up, sorry?
Wait till we get the secretary
Sure.
back? Thank you. She went to get her box of magic tricks, it looks like.
Oh. Should we go, is she going to get him?
Okay. Did you get his address, name and address? Okay. Tell us about your project.
Okay, I know we were going to be tabling it, I believe, so, but in general, the project is, I purchased Homestead in early November with the idea of revitalizing it to and bringing it back to its heyday, so to speak. To revitalize the club, expand the current club, add fitness facilities, group fitness center, etc., and then also to enclose a bank of 4 tennis courts at the same time.
Yeah, it is a public hearing, and I know we have people here from the public, so we will open up the public hearing and allow them to speak, but I'd like to hear from staff first, and we can go back over this next month.
Yes, we had completed our staff report on all the submittals, and then Public Works indicated they weren't far enough along on the drainage study for them, and they thought some revisions to the site plan could possibly come out of the results of the drainage study. So the applicant was not able to get that done in time, and so typically what we've done is we've conditioned some of these approvals on the drainage study coming back with positive findings. With this area and the extent of it, the Public Works Director wasn't confident with that position. He wanted to wait for the full drainage study. So that's why we were recommending it be continued to the March 6th meeting, and we take on the full application and all the details.
But since we do have members of the public here, I'm going to open up the public hearing and allow anyone from the public to speak on this matter. Your name and address, please.
Good evening. I'm Mary Ann Murray Simons. I live at 4110 Homestead Drive in Prairie Village. I'm joined this evening by my husband, Ken. We've lived at our home for 22 years this month, as a matter of fact, and have lived in Prairie Village since 1981. Also, I'm joined by neighbors who can raise their hands, who live on the perimeter of the neighborhood, and if it's your pleasure, Madam Chair, I have been selected to speak on behalf of those who live around the perimeter of Homestead.
Thank you.
We've got some drawings that we can put up just to give you some perspective, if that might be helpful to those of you. Would that be okay?
Yeah.
All right, let's
Bring
put
'em on.
those up. While those are getting set, I'll go ahead and get started with my comments. As you probably know, our neighborhood centers around this neighborhood recreational club established in 1952 by J.C. Nichols. And it was intended to service those in the neighborhood. And there are many of us, ourselves included, who have been longtime members of the club while our children were young and utilizing its services. We understand the value of this centrally located resource. However, many of us have experienced both the highs and the lows of Homestead Country Club over the years. We know that when it rains, it literally pours downhill from the significant impermeable surfaces, including the 16 existing tennis courts, parking lots, and the clubhouse. Dennis Hulsing, who you just met, acknowledged the existing drainage problems that exist with the current club, and he pledged during a January 16th meeting that Homestead hosted for affected neighbors to take care of the drainage issues. The existing drainage issues, coupled with the addition of over 7,000 square feet to the clubhouse, will grow that building to over 19,000 square feet. An additional 28,716 square feet of new parking brings the total to over 41,600 square feet of impermeable parking, which is of great concern to us as well. To give you some perspective, the club's new and proposed parking will be almost as long as a football field and almost 148 feet wide. The existing lot on the north side of the club already creates very serious drainage issues and runoff to our neighbors on the north and the west. We're concerned about this new parking compounding an ongoing drainage issue on the north side of the club. We ask that Mr. Hulsing hire an engineer to develop the drainage study and plan that the city can review, approve, and oversee through the years to make sure that all issues that are committed to are actually followed through on. As a good neighbor, we want to trust Mr. Hulsing. However, we've been told in the past by previous Homestead representatives that ongoing drainage flooding issues would be solved, but countless promises through the years have been broken. Many of us, ourselves included, have spent thousands of dollars to protect our properties, but the fact remains that when we get a heavy rain, homes on the north, the south, and the west of the club take the brunt of the stormwater. We understand that the city is closely monitoring drainage problems on the side of Homestead's recently sold land to the east of the club due to significant flooding issues for Indian Fields neighbors. We know these two properties share the same drainage issues, and we would ask the city to protect existing homes surrounding Homestead Country Club as they are the homes surrounding the new Evan Talon home sites. We would also welcome the opportunity to work with Mr. Hulsing and the city to finally solve this recurring problem that impacts our home's values and our community. We're also very concerned about the new buildings that are being proposed on the site. The new permanent tennis structure is proposed to be 35 feet tall, although none of the plans have been provided showing exactly the dimensions of the building or the building's materials. Based on the current forecourt dimensions that the building will cover, this building could be at least 210 feet wide and 120 feet long, which is equal to 25,200 square feet. By comparison, the new enclosed tennis building roof area is larger than the expanded club's roof area. After negotiations with neighbors following that January 16th neighborhood meeting, the new tennis building is being proposed to be placed on the existing tennis bubble site rather than the four courts on the southwest corner of the club where it was originally sited. And you can see on the drawings here an arrow pointing to where that's to move. Neighbors whose homes back up to the proposed building were not thrilled with the prospect of this very large building in their backyards, and Mr. Hulsing agreed to move the structure. We appreciate his willingness to work with neighbors, and we hope that spirit of cooperation continues as plans are finalized. Lighting around this structure is also to be controlled from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m., but it needs careful review and oversight. The new enclosed tennis building and restroom facility is proposed to replace the seasonal tennis bubble that's put up each fall and taken down each spring, and by city mandate is only supposed to be in place for 6 months of the year between October and April. On the south side of the existing clubhouse, a new 30-foot extension is being proposed that will abut my backyard as well as my neighbors to the east. Based on Mr. Holsing's promise to maintain green space throughout the club grounds, this significant building seems large, not to mention that the footprint could cover storm drainage swales and a main drain located on the south side of that building. This additional impermeable square footage is of great concern as stormwater runoff flows directly to and through our yards, and at times our homes, toward the main drain located on Homestead Drive. Add to this the addition of 2 banks of raised tennis courts between the clubhouse and the tennis courts that creates additional runoff on the south side of the club, not to mention the significant light pollution experienced by those of us who live nearby. Screening the perimeter of the club with mature evergreen trees of a certain height, width, and caliper is something neighbors would also like to see. This landscaping, that will be designed by a landscape architect according to Mr. Holsing, will be selected and planted to both screen our homes from the club as well as serve as a sound barrier. We look forward to understanding what's included in this plan and ask that the club maintain both new and existing trees on the site that add to the character of the club and to the neighborhood. Mr. Holsing and Indian Fields neighbors have pledged to be good neighbors to each other and to help protect each other's investments, both the club and our homes. How can we coexist in our neighborhood? Homestead can partner with neighbors to contain and control stormwater runoff. Homestead can recognize that it sits in the middle of a residential area, requiring that, like homeowners, the club must be a good neighbor during both this approval process and for years to come. Mr. Holsing can present detailed plans to neighbors and provide the opportunity for our input and comment. And Homestead can do the right thing and fix the problems that have plagued neighbors through the years and have placed a wedge between many of us and the club. Under new ownership, we appreciate Mr. Holsing's willingness to hear our concerns and jointly develop solutions that benefit us all, and we look forward to having those conversations. We also look to the city to be diligent in its oversight of the Homestead expansion that will be submitted in March, so that the approval process includes specifics about what's expected from the club and in what time frame. Thank you for your consideration.
Anybody else who would like to speak to this matter tonight? We will be continuing this to the March 1st meeting, and so the public comment portion will still be open at March 1st, and we can revisit some of these items that,
Point of clarification, it's March 6th.
I'm sorry, March 6th. Okay, excuse me, March 6th. I have my meeting dates all screwed up. So we'll be continuing it till March 6th. So if anybody would like to reserve their comments for then, we'll probably be taking it up after the drainage is taken and the stormwater runoff is taken a look at. I can't hear you. You have to talk into your mic.
You should make a motion by the Plan Commission to continue it, if that's what you do.
Continue? Yeah, okay. But does anybody else need to speak tonight? Thank you for representing the homeowners, and I.
I have a quick comment. I would love for that letter just to be sent over. Do we have that on file? I think it'd be good to just have that on file.
Your comments
I have a copy of my comments that I can share.
electronically?
I can share them electronically if you give me an email address, sure.
Okay,
Happy to do it.
thank you.
Thank you.
I had a quick question.
Yes, sir.
And I apologize. The red square to the right, what I would say the northeast corner, that is not on the plan that I have. What is that representing? Right-hand side, up to the
Northeast.
northeast.
The smaller red square up to the right, upper right
Yep.
there.
Okay. Thank you.
Righty. Mr. Holsing, I think maybe you might have heard some of the comments, and so when you can take some of those into consideration before we see you next month. Do I have a motion to continue the public hearing until next month?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Wolf. Seconded by Mr. Valentino. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, it's unanimous. We'll see you on March 6th. Thank you. Next item up is 7930 State Line Road, request for special use permit for a car wash. The Tidal Wave people here. Do you have a electronic presentation? Thank you.
We do.
And your name and address, please.
Good evening. My name is Aaron March. I'm an attorney with the White Goss Law Firm. Address is 4510 Bellevue in Kansas City, Missouri. I'm here tonight on behalf of the applicant as well as Tidal Wave. With me in the audience is Mr. Petty Harden, a principal of Tidal Wave, and also Mr. Thomas Wells. He's the development consultant for all of the Tidal Waves we hope you'll be seeing going up in the metropolitan Kansas City area. Before we jump into our PowerPoint presentation, we have copies of it that we'll pass out to you so you can follow along in your hymnal with us. I'd like to thank staff. Chris has been wonderful to work with. A lot of back and forth and detail has been gone through, and he's made this one of the more pleasant zoning and development processes that I've been involved with, so thank you. And I'd also like to thank the neighbors who came out in the bitter cold a couple of weeks ago to our neighborhood meeting. We received some very positive feedback that you'll hear tonight has been incorporated into our plan, so I'd like to thank them. This is the site we're talking about. This is State Line on the right-hand side on the east of our development site. The address of the site is 7930 State Line Road. There's the Chinese takeout to the north of us, the little retail development to the north at the corner. The bank that's undergoing redevelopment is to the south of us, and we have single family surrounding us to the north and west. It's a 1.3 acre site, and it's currently zoned CP1. In 2015, the city approved a preliminary development plan to allow for a fast food drive-through restaurant facility here. And we're here tonight asking for two things: that you allow us not to change the zoning, because the CP1 zoning is appropriate, but to approve a new preliminary development plan. And the second thing we're asking you for is to approve the special use permit for the car wash facility. This is the building that is on the site today, 7930. It's been unoccupied for approximately 2 years. It's been vacant since the last rezoning was gone through. And just the change, as noted in the staff report, just the change in the business community, the business that would likely go on a highly intensive State Line Road with retail all around it. It's not likely that we'd ever see office uses here again today. I'd like to now turn the presentation over to Mr. Harden, but I'd like to let you know in advance that we concur with the staff report, all of the comments made in the staff report, all of the stipulations, with the exception of one that we'd like to modify, and I'll get to that at the very end. So now turn it over to Mr. Harden.
Hello, my name is Petty Harden with Tidal Wave Auto Spas. My address is P.O. Box 311, Thomaston, Georgia, 30286. Thank you all for having us tonight. I'll be short-winded with my short presentation. I just wanted to step up and tell you a little bit about myself and Tidal Wave. Our company history, we started washing cars in '04. Based out of Atlanta, Georgia was our first location. Over the last 15 years, we've owned and operated and constructed. This Prairie Village location would be our 36th location, primarily in the southeastern states, but we're expanding as things have gotten more concentrated in that area, so we're moving to the Midwest and have several locations proposed in the metro area of Kansas City. We have a long history of being in the business and have been recognized by the Small Business Association Administration as Business of the Year in Georgia back in 2009. We've been recognized also, I don't have this on the slide, but Modern Car Care is a magazine that rates car washes, and it's some industry trends and that type thing. But there's over 27,000 car washes in the country right now. And in years past, we've consistently rated in the top 50 car washes through that magazine, have been recognized for that, and we're very grateful of that. Our company objectives are pretty simple. We don't want to be necessarily the most attractive car wash in the community, which of course we do, but we take it a notch further, and we want to be the most attractive business in the community. And we take a lot of strides to do that, and you'll see some renderings later about some of the facilities that we build and our focus on landscaping and architecture and stacked stone and things that make our business very attractive. We want to provide the cleanest, greenest, and easiest car cleaning service available. About 60% of our business is actually females with disposable incomes, so we make a very inviting environment for folks to come through with their families and their children throughout the day. We operate in the standards of our operation. We try to resemble like Chick-fil-A. You may not eat at Chick-fil-A and you may not like their food, but I think it's hard to deny that they operate a top-notch business with a great service, and the facilities are always clean and well maintained, and that's what we strive to be like. Our operations, we are open 7 days a week. Most locations are 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., but in different regions that can change with the season. Obviously, in the wintertime, it gets dark earlier, and when we have found that folks don't wash their vehicles that often after dark, so in the wintertime, we're inclined to close a little bit earlier, but 8 to 8 are some general operating hours. We do recycle a lot of the water that we use at our locations. We've got a water reclamation system that processes. You can't recycle all of the water. There's certain things that can't be recycled, but a large portion of it we do. And without boring you with reading all of what this says, if you wash your car in your driveway, you may use, depending on how long you run the water hose, you may use 100 gallons of water, let's just say. Through our reclamation process and the way that we wash cars, we got it down to about 20 gallons of water is what we use. So my point being that we're water conservers, not water wasters. And all the water is filtered prior to it entering the sanitary sewer system. We're also very involved in the communities in which we operate. We support our local schools, athletic booster clubs, the teams, churches, 501c3s. Every year in September on the third Friday, we have a charity day of whatever charity we choose or whatever comes to us, and we decide to go with on that day. 100% of all our proceeds that day goes to a special needs charity. So we're very involved in the communities in which we operate. We take a lot of pride in that, and we really look forward to coming and being a part of the Prairie Village community. With that, I would like to turn it over to Thomas Wells, who is on our development team on our new locations that we're developing and under construction. So I'll introduce Thomas Wells here. He'll take it for a few minutes. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thomas Wells, 4335 South Lee Street, Beaufort, Georgia. This is a picture of the site plan with the landscape present. We've basically taken the two entrances that are currently existing on the site and combined that into one entrance exit location. You have an entrance lane that comes through and then circles back up towards this being a pay station. Then that feeds into the actual tunnel itself that does the car wash. Prior to preparing this plan, we had met with some of the neighbors, gotten some more information from some of the issues that were raised in 2015 and tried to incorporate modifications to our original plan to address or mitigate those. One of those was the actual location of the tunnel was originally planned to be up here more towards the center part of the site and the north side. But after those discussions, the site was flipped, and then where the dryers on the exit end of the tunnel are in close proximity to State Line Road. This is actual photograph of an existing store to give you an idea of the building elements. This is the tunnel itself. We've got stacked veneer stone on top of a concrete water table, and then a split face concrete masonry unit on the lower elevation. Then this is the mechanical room that adjoins the wash. All of the equipment is enclosed. And again, we've carried the same theme with the split face CMU, the concrete water table, ephes for the larger sections of the wall elevation, and then corner elements with the veneer stone as well. This is the pay station going, or pay terminal, and I'll go back to the site plan to show you where that's at. That is located here. It's basically like an ATM machine with a overhang canopy. There's a picture of the canopy. This is a rendering of the elevation. Again, you can see this would be the west end of the building, the mechanical room protruding to the north. This is the southern elevation, predominantly glass with the stone and masonry accent on each end. The eave height is 12 feet, top of the peak is roughly 18 feet. This is the exit that would be closest to State Line Road. Again, very similar mirror exit end, mechanical room. And this is the end that would contain the dryers within this portion of the building here. And we've since placed it directly adjoining State Line Road. Northern elevation, back to the interior of the site. And then this is a picture of an existing gasoline canopy. These have a minimum of 9 feet clear. We're not serving box trucks or vans, so we've got, as you saw earlier, we've got a 7'2" minimum clearance because of the equipment used. So the maximum the minimum clearance on the canopy would be 9 feet with a facade of 42 inches. This is the vacuum enclosure that contains the actual mechanical equipment that does the vacuum process. And in the neighborhood meeting back in January, that was one of the requests or comments that we had received about where that was located on the site. And we were able to make that modification, and it's shown here in a site plan, in the landscape plan coming up. This is the privacy fence that is proposed where this property abuts the residential properties on the northwest side and in the southwest corner. It's actually a composite fence that has a lifetime guarantee. It simulates a rock wall, but it also has some soundproofing qualities as well, and would be certainly basically zero maintenance once it's constructed versus a wooden privacy fence, cedar fence. This is a cross-section of the buffer. This portion of the site along this northwest side and bringing the drive around back up. This is a cross-section, through this area here. So we've got the property line, this is the backyard of the residential properties to the northwest, and then there's an existing chain link fence that basically serves as a barrier on site now between the residential properties and the existing parking lot that basically extends up to the fence of the vacant office building. And so our plan is to come back in and create a landscape buffer by planting some evergreen, large shrubs, small trees, arborvitaes along that portion, and then the privacy fence would be located on the interior of the site, adjoining the paved area. During the two primary issues that we received during the neighborhood meeting was to relocate the vacuum enclosure, which was down at this end in closer proximity to the residential properties. Even though this is enclosed and we've had, sound measurements taken, that within 25 feet, this thing's less than 63 decibels while it's running, but we were able to remove it from this island and bring it back down to this end of the site, further away from all of the residential properties. Another modification since the neighborhood meeting was the installation was originally planned for the privacy fence to come and return to this point, but we've now modified the plan to bring that back up past the end of the residential property located on the abutting south property line. Again, to kind of recap, we reconfigured the site, pushed the tunnel back to the southwest portion and face the actual exit in towards State Line Road. We talked about the vacuum enclosure. It's enclosed to muffle, prevent sound, but we've also relocated that so that it's no closer. The closest residential property lines with in excess of 140 linear feet. I'll turn it back over to Mr. March.
So in 2015, the preliminary plan that was approved allowed for the fried chicken restaurant that was going to be allowed to stay open till 11 o'clock at night. We think that our use is a much lower intensity use and less invasive on the neighborhood, but also one in keeping with the character of State Line Road. You have Culver's on the Missouri side, you've got the CVS with the drive-through, the McDonald's with the drive-through, the restaurant immediately to the north of us with the drive-through. We think we are a much more compatible and a much more visibly appealing use than what is currently approved today. From a traffic perspective, we are going to generate approximately 34% fewer trips just by the nature of our business, and those trips typically are not in the AM and PM peak, which is of most concern on State Line Road. And we are reducing the number of curb cuts onto State Line Road from the two full ones. We're combining them into one, which is going to make a much safer condition. As I said earlier, the conditions of approval, we agree with all of the conditions 1 through 7 as written by staff. We think staff's done a wonderful job. We request that condition 8 be modified so that as long as we abide by the rules of the approval, as long as the conditions that allow for the approval we hope to get ultimately continue to be maintained, and that staff believes that those conditions are satisfied, that our special use permit will automatically renew. It's very difficult to get a loan for a $3.4 million facility when all you know you'll be able to operate it for us for 5 years. So we're looking for a little more certainty that our lender will allow us, that our lender will know that as long as we play by the rules, do things properly, aren't cited by staff, that we will automatically be renewed, knowing full well that if we don't comply with the conditions of approval, don't operate a quality facility, we're shut down under your rules and regulations today. So we're asking that the condition be modified. The red is new language, the black is strike through. I tried to keep with the existing language as much as possible rather than totally rewriting the regulation. You have the discretion, you and the council have the discretion to have the special use permit be for an unlimited amount of time. We're not asking it be for an unlimited period of time. We're asking that the renewals be automatic for 5-year periods, subject to our compliance. With that, we'd be happy to answer any questions which you might have, either of me or any members of the team, Mr. Wells or Mr. Hart. Thank you.
I think we'll turn it over to Mr. Brewster here to make comments.
Thank you. I just want to cover a few of the key points of the staff report. As the applicant mentioned, the property is zoned CP1 as of the 2015 action, the preliminary development plan. Basically, it's a planned zoning district, so it's conditioned on a site plan. So any significant changes to that require you to revisit that development plan. So since this is an entirely new use, entirely new structure and site layout, it kicks it back to that original review process to amend that plan and put this new plan in place of the one that wasn't executed. So some of the criteria that you consider are very similar to what you considered with that first application. We covered most of the zoning conditions haven't changed since 2015. It's the same oddly configured site. It's the same marginalized office building. It's the same context around the area, commercial oriented, high traffic corridor and more car oriented commercial uses than are elsewhere in the city, and the same very sensitive boundary with the neighborhoods to the north and to the west. And so those were some of the things we looked at under the general zoning. The comprehensive plan instantly calls for commercial reinvestment. This area was identified as that. So things like this aren't necessarily unexpected, but it's the impact on residents and the impact on the public streetscapes and public image are what the comprehensive plan suggests needs the most attention when projects like this occur. The other details with the plan development deal more with the preliminary development plan that the applicant has walked through. I just wanted to hit a couple of the high points. I guess I'll hit them in order here. The site is capable of accommodating buildings, parking areas, and drives with the appropriate open space and landscaping. We did have our landscape architect is reviewing the plan, and we did have some additional comments that we wanted addressed, and so those are included in our recommendations. Overall, however, we did see this one as an improvement to the existing condition because there's less impervious surface, but there also was a good deal of attention paid to the neighborhood boundary, particularly the softening of the fence on the neighbor's side. They've provided some specifications and photo examples you saw of the fence. So our landscape architect had some concerns with that that he'll be looking at through the final landscape plan, but it appears to be a pretty good screen in terms of visual and noise. They provided a cross-section. The last application, if you remember, with the drive-through, traffic headlight and glare was a major concern. So they provided a cross-section with the grading that demonstrates that there should not be any light impact from that for that issue. We will be looking at, obviously, the applicant needs to maintain their own property. So with any type of fencing, you always are kind of concerned about the exterior behind that, who's maintaining that. So in our mind, it's the applicant's obligation to keep maintaining that. It's outside of that fence backs up to those residents. So we'll be making sure the landscape plan has easily maintained or areas that are capable of maintaining back behind that fence as well. The next criteria is utilities. Again, this is the same. Other than water, which I think the applicant has been in communications with Johnson County Water, there's no reason to think this site doesn't meet all of the utility requirements from the previous use and what was previously planned. Adequate management of stormwater. Public Works has viewed this preliminary plan, and again, with the drop in impervious surface, expected to see some improvements, so they weren't going to require a full drainage study, but we're going to be monitoring this at the building permit application to make sure that all of their drainage permit conditions are met. Safe and easy ingress and internal traffic circulation. The applicant provided a traffic study that showed comparable or reduced levels and different peak times. It was Public Works' opinion that they agreed with that finding, and they agreed with the fact that this shouldn't have a significant impact on state line. They agreed with saw as an improvement the consolidation to one single entrance and exit point. So that was their main position, and so they agreed with that. Internal circulation, there's plenty of stacking areas for this type of use. There's probably a few difficult maneuvers, so we didn't see anything, obviously this is a lot of slow speed movements, and we didn't see anything that caused any concern. I was talking with the Public Works Director today, and he agreed that it's more their internal management than anything that would cause an impact on public traffic, since there's so much queuing area for the traffic circulation. An issue that did come up since our staff report is the fire marshal raised some concerns about emergency access. So we do have a recommendation of a new condition, should you recommend approval of this. Mainly it has to do with, they wanted to see sufficient maneuvering for one of their largest emergency vehicles on the site. So the applicant has prepared what's called an auto turn drawing. It's an engineered drawing that shows how their design vehicle can maneuver in the site. And the concept they're working with is to actually take the median that separates that entrance lane from the other lanes at about halfway down. It would actually be a drive-over curb or a painted stripe, so that an emergency vehicle could turn into those other two lanes if they needed to. And then if they needed to turn around, they could back into those parking areas that are on the north end that stub out from that drive lane and then exit the facility. And so the fire marshal agreed with that concept could work. He had a few concerns with the details, mainly that he didn't want to be backing into somewhere that could be parking. So we have an additional condition to address that prior to final development plan. Appropriate degree of compatibility between the architectural quality of the proposed building and surrounding neighborhood. We looked at a lot of the building heights and elevations they supplied. They have material samples here. They provided a lot of pictures of their prototype store. We didn't see any significant issues. They use a stone finish that's comparable to a lot of the buildings in Prairie Village. Other than the ephes and metal materials, which are on more remote portions of the site, the building's facade has a nice appearance on state line. The relationships to adjacent property are mainly with the commercial office that's set back there. I'll go through those criteria in a moment because they're part of the overall site plan for the building. They proposed their standard standing seam roof with blue color with the cultured stone and the ephes to match for not only the principal building but all the accessory structures as well, including the trash enclosure and the vacuum building as well. One of the options for under plan zoning is if they need any exceptions to the development standards. This is CP1, so we go by the C1 standards for building height and setback unless they needed to adjust it based on this particular site or this particular plan. We did not find that any adjustments were necessary. They're meeting all the C1 standards. C1 has a building height allowance of 35 feet. Their proposed building is 18 feet at the ridge line. The setback in C1, it takes on basically the adjacent property setback. So to the, it's a 0-foot side setback in general, but if it's zoned something lesser, it takes on that setback. So this is the case for both the residential boundary and actually the office to the south. That's in Leawood, but it's, the comparable zoning district would be CO in Prairie Village. So the setback requirement would be 10 feet. It's actually a tiered setback based on the height of the building. So if it's 1 story, it would be 10 feet. If it's 2 story, it would be 15 feet. So their proposed building location meets that as well, and they meet the rear setbacks. So there wasn't any modifications that were needed under the CP zoning. This plan meets both C1 and therefore CP1. This application also includes a special use permit. A lot of the criteria in the special use permit for the car wash use itself, a lot of the criteria in the special use permit are the same as were used under the plan zoning for the site development plan that we just went through. So most of the staff report just defers to those comments. There is one exception, and that's the general public. Adjoining properties and the general public will be adequately protected from any hazardous or toxic materials, hazardous manufacturing or processes, obnoxious odors, or unnecessary intrusive noises. The applicant has explained what they have done with locating some of the more intensive portions of the site closer to state line, and they've also provided an acoustic study of one of their comparable locations. We had a little bit of hard time determining how those portions on that comparable location would translate to this site. However, it appeared to be that what they were showing met all what would typically be found in a noise ordinance. Therefore, we went and surveyed some of the peer communities and some of the other Johnson County's communities that do have noise ordinances. We surveyed some of their requirements, and therefore, as part of the special use permit, we were going to recommend that the decibel levels be monitored in compliance with some of those noise ordinances, having a different daytime and nighttime performance standard, which could be part of the special use permits criteria that they would need to continually meet. And we set those at what the typical residential commercial boundary is in some of those peer communities. With that, we are recommending approval, and I'll go through some of the requirements and conditions we're recommending in detail. Some landscape plan amendments, again, those were specifically recommended by our landscape architect after his review on certain species, on certain additions of planting, particularly dealing with the frontage and improving the frontage relationship there on state line. Site plan amendments, and these would be prior to final development plan. We'd be looking for more specifics on which color they're using and looking at closer at the landscaping around that to soften the view of that fence for the residents primarily. Identifying utility boxes, determine visual impact and screen those from adjacent property. Indicate pole heights and location of the lights. They've included a lighting study that demonstrated they meet the performance criteria, but we just want to make sure the locations and heights, it was a little bit difficult to see where they were. So at the final plan, we're going to want to see those a little more closely to ensure that those performance criteria are met. Final elevations of the buildings. We received some of those after this staff report, so those look like they're in line, and we would just expect a little bit further detail at the final development plan. All signs, we haven't looked at any signs for this, so we're assuming that all signs would meet the city's ordinance requirements, and they would need separate sign permits. If they do plan a monument sign for this site on state line, that should be approved with the final plan at Planning Commission. Operational limits. There are pay kiosks under the central portion of the site there, the canopy. So we did not have a lot of details on activities go on in there. Our thought was the performance criteria of the noise limits would guard anything that may happen. So we just wanted to get a few more specifics of what goes on under there, and then as well as the hours of operation limited to 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. They've indicated that they typically operate 8 to 8, but they like some flexibility between the hours. So that was one of the conditions we were suggesting, to put outward limits on that. Appropriate drainage permits is obviously a next step prior to final development plan. I need to go back, I'm sorry, to add the additional condition to condition 2 on the site plan amendments. And this deals with that fire and emergency access issue. Again, the fire marshal has agreed in concept with what they showed and thought it could work, and it's removing the curbing so that the truck can pull through the lanes and then back into the parking. But he had a concern about backing into something that could or would likely have vehicle parking there. So the condition 2E that we're recommending would be the applicant continue to advance the concept for emergency vehicle access shown in the auto turn exhibit that they have submitted, except that the back-end area would be a fire lane designated for no parking, and any loss of the parking in that location be moved to some other portion of the site plan. And talking with the applicant, it looks like they may lose 1, possibly 2 spots there, and it's basically employee parking since there isn't any customer parking. And so they were pretty confident they could find that somewhere else on the site, and we were comfortable with that too, but that we would come back with something more definite on that on the final development plan. The last condition is on the special use permit and the timing of it. The 5 years has been typical. The Planning Commission and Council have granted indefinite ones based on the concerns the applicant raised. We don't necessarily have any concern with what they've proposed, provided we've identified some of the concerns here, and based on your final recommendation, we don't have any issues with that. The city's always in a position where they can enforce these and revoke these if those conditions aren't being met, whether it's a 5-year renewal period or an indefinite. So it would just be on us to make sure that we're in communication with residents or people impacted by this to know when there's a violation of the condition and bring them in to either address it or look at a revocation of the permit.
This is a public hearing, and so I will open. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's what I was just referring to. We don't necessarily have a problem with that. Yes, and in fact, I think some of the cities, usually it's on maybe the second time in, they'll grant indefinite time limits, and so we are used to dealing with that situation and know that we have to be on guard to enforce things as soon as we hear there's an issue. To be honest with you, I haven't dealt with the situation when there is an issue that often, but I know that what the concern they've raised is a common concern, and from the city standpoint, as long as we have the ability to revoke and enforce, we're okay with it. It just puts the onus on us to do that.
I don't recall ever seeing that.
And I'll open up the public hearing. Is there anyone from the public who would like to speak to this matter? If so, come to the microphone and give us your name and address.
Good evening, my name is David Wooldridge. I live at 2115 Somerset Drive, Prairie Village, Kansas. I've lived here at this residence with my wife and my 5 kids for a little over a decade. We bought this property, with 2 quiet office buildings behind us. Had a corner coffee shop and wanted a small adjacent business. We didn't expect it to be torn down, one office building to be raised in our absence. And I'm a construction engineer. I travel quite a bit, and this office building was torn down, and a Panda Express was installed when I was out of town. And my wife was telling me about the day-to-day construction. Anyway, we were looking at the Slim Chickens that was approved, and then they backed out, and they were trying to shoehorn this restaurant like this harpoon into our neighborhood. There's no less than 9 residences here, and we were looking at 2 office buildings here, and then suddenly that changed to Panda Express. And West Jordan, during the course of this approval, he said, well, you are welcome to call anytime you want to about any kind of disturbances up here. I mentioned the nighttime deliveries, and we had Panda Express no less than 8 calls to the Prairie Village Police about deliveries at 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning, and just continued, just deliveries by Cisco. And we took Wes up on his offer, and finally a ticket was issued, and they stopped because somebody was actually letting them in. So the city enforcing things, well, maybe not. And it's the Panda Express. I wish I were in town when that was. I would have put up more of an argument towards that. As far as the character of this neighborhood, 70% of the real estate on State Line, the Kansas side, is office buildings. And that's a little over 70%. And on the Missouri side, it's about 92%, what you call commercial high-intensity businesses, Quick Trips, the ice cream place, Culver's, CVS, McDonald's. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. There's actually a car wash, your competitors just down the street. There are no residences behind those intense businesses. On the Missouri side, I guess Missouri saw fit not to build businesses adjacent to residences. That's not the case here on the Kansas side. We have 9 residences that are backed up to this, what looks like a shoehorn attempt to squeeze this business into here behind these residences. And at 12 hours a day, that's on a busy day. Some experts talk about 500-600 cars a day, just like this, like a Circus Maximus in our backyard. No matter what trees, no matter what, if you put an 8-foot or 10-foot fence, it hits me on my back patio. It hits me right about here when I walk out, right about here, just about knee-high below, and I get the full purview of just a circulation of cars, and it's 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. And that's not what I didn't buy a house where the city would shoehorn a car wash behind my house. That's not what I wanted. I have no place for my grandkids to play. It's peaceful, and that's not what I call peace and quiet. It's not acceptable, and we were just really aghast. And it wasn't just a pleasurable meeting here with a bunch of positive comments at our neighborhood meeting here in February. When it was 7 degrees and hardly anybody could show up, I said, no, this isn't going to work for me. It's against my best interest in my family, and it goes against the golden factors. And it does that we're adopted by the city of Prairie Village. It's a matter of, I guess what I'm trying to say here, I guess if you put lipstick on a pig, it's still a pig. It's just the way we say it in construction. I'm a hydrologist. I do a lot of hydrology studies. I look at this, it flunked. Right now it flunks. It's impermeable surfaces, concrete, asphalt are slightly permeable. That doesn't balance it doesn't balance it is today, and that doesn't even balance if you did it a second time, no matter if you had detention reservoirs on site. It still doesn't balance. And that's at first blush using rational methods. It's just a matter of, we don't want a giant car wash to live behind a car wash and in Prairie Village. That's not what we bought. We bought these houses knowing that this is Prairie Village. We don't have to worry about folks moving in from Georgia, building a car wash behind our house. Now, it's just a little bit ridiculous to us. We just really don't want to live behind that. I thank you very much for your
Thank you,
time. I
Mr.
ask you not to
Woolridge.
approve this.
Okay, anybody else who wants to speak to this matter tonight? Seeing none, I will close the public portion of the meeting, public hearing portion. Do we have any questions for staff?
Yeah, when was the plan submitted that flipped where the vacuum hut is?
We never received the central one, so I believe that happened before the official submittal, perhaps with the concept. That's probably a question for the applicant, or we just reviewed the
That's correct. We actually met with Mr. Woolridge, was kind enough to give us some of his time before we ever made the initial application, trying to discern what the previous issues were with the Slim Chickens proposal. And it was during those series of meetings and discussions that the reorientation of the site occurred.
Okay. I like it. Unfortunately, the civil drawings are still reflecting that the vacuum screening is on the west side of the site, and I believe now you're intending for it to be on the east side, kind of right next to your car wash building? Is that
Correct, yes.
correct?
And this is the
So I don't know that
preliminary
you could
plan.
approve the drawings in that sense.
Yeah, I thought you were referring to the building itself.
No,
the whole site.
not the building change.
Yeah,
the-
no, that's a change
'cause
from the submittal.
Correct me if I'm wrong, the vacuum screening hut is the noisy thing, right? That's
Right, the comment came from the neighborhood meeting, the relocation of the vacuum and the extension of the fence, so that was not part of the original application. The neighborhood meeting took place, several weeks, or 3 or 4 weeks after the application was made.
I agree with the new location. It's just the civil doesn't show that.
Correct.
Go ahead.
I also would like to comment on the, let's see, sheet 4 is where I picked it up. It's the site plan. I know there's not a lot of pedestrian traffic on State Line. I'm a realist, but I do think that the striping for the turn lanes and kind of that first pause for cars to be looking out as they're turning on a State Line, I think should be pulled. Maybe there's like a stripe pulled back behind that sidewalk. Yeah, as I'm coming out of the car wash, I've been checking my phone the whole time because I just, that's my quiet time, and so I'm not really paying attention yet. And I'd like to make sure that that's safe for pedestrians crossing. Maybe there's some striping for the sidewalk or a little raised kind of thing, or anyway.
Yeah, this is a preliminary concept, from discussions here tonight and going forward that we can incorporate into the final design plan. There is shown on this plan a continuation of the sidewalk along State Line Road, so obviously showing some sort of pedestrian crosswalk there to tie those two together, and ADA ramps, et cetera, would be included in a final design.
Mr. Valentina?
Customers per hour and percentage ratio, and how do you get drive at that am I kind of correct, 17 slots?
Yeah, there again, approximately with the relocation of the vac enclosure building itself, plus or minus 1 or 2, as we move forward in the final design. But typically, it's kind of like more of a convenience factor. and we had this discussion in the neighborhood meeting, and these are oversized spaces, typically 12 and a half feet wide, but when you pull up and you open all 4 doors and, you're doing your vacuuming, if there's an opportunity to go one more space down and leave one open, so, the net effect is there's probably functionally 8 to 12 spaces at any, point in time, but we just don't know where they're gonna park. So, that's one of the rationales for, the number of vacuum spaces. As a general rule, we like to try to have at least 18 as a minimum, preferably 24 to 26 spaces. In a lot of,
Associated with this size of, this is a standard size car wash for your program? And
correct,
18 to 24.
correct.
Okay. Yeah, I feel like there's probably a couple factors or levels in which this property is maybe causing a heartburn in the public, on the public side. Car wash aside, this site really does penetrate into their backyard, and to me, reduction of the number of vacuum stations would possibly allow you to round out that turn a little better instead of having that penetrate as deep. And that's my thought process. I don't know. I'm thinking in terms of this is anecdotal. I understand, but there's a big splash on Metcalf, like we're on 83rd and Metcalf, that seems very similar in nature, that I don't think has stations. And I go there a lot, a couple times a month. I've never seen it full. I'm trying, and so I was trying to tie that, I guess, to maybe a little bit of math, like if you have, I don't know, I see it says 39 per hour, and it's 8% of people go to the vacuum station, and you're making 15 minutes per use, and then you're operating at approximately 8 stations necessary, so then you have maybe, you said an extra
8.
percentage, maybe it's, yeah, so you're doubling.
Right, we're back to the 16 again.
Well, I'm not necessarily on board with that.
Right.
From a safety factor standpoint, I think that's inappropriate.
Well, in the existing impervious area, parking field extends to this point today. So, we have pulled it back considerably from what exists currently, but duly noted.
I understand. I also think that the use of those stations is much different than a quiet parking lot that really no activity occurs in. So that's my thought on that. Also, the metal canopy itself on that structure seems really
Thick.
just really catches the eye. I don't know how to put that. I'm trying to think in terms of just ignoring the car wash for a second. Just what is there, and if I put the structure up, I hear you that this blue seems to be part of your program, but almost it says 42 inch, so 3.5 foot tall canopy structure that's bright blue. That the resident is correct that they are basically staring like right at that thing based on the elevation and grades. That's a lot. I would not want to stay with that. Seems like you have some nice treatments. You try to upgrade your facility. certain if there's a solution on that, but I'd love a little bit more reality of what the decibel readings are and just a commitment. I mean, if it's bad, it's bad. Let's talk about it.
Jeffrey, I'll tell you there are, it's called a central vacuum system, so there's a 25 horsepower motor, it's a 25 horsepower motor that's tied to a turbine, and that one suction device is piped to pull all 17 of those drops. And it's very typical for that system to be outdoors, and we used to put them outdoors, but then as noise concerns came up, they're really not that loud, but they do make some noise. But when we put them in this enclosure, and it is a concrete building with the roof on it, it is with a door that you open the door to go in there, and there's your noise inside there. The noise is what little noise is coming out is projected up. I wish we weren't so far away from any of our other operating locations, but I would entertain flying anybody down to any of our locations to be able to see it, or maybe I could take some videos. That's hard to tell on videos to be listening.
Temperature in Georgia right now.
What was that? The noise is, the most amount of noise from any of our car washes is definitely from the end inside the tunnel where the dryers are. It's the very end of the car wash, and that's definitely where we have a lot of motors in there that are drying the car. And by reconfiguring that and having those motors facing towards state line, that has addressed the big noise concern. I can assure you the vacuums being inside that vacuum enclosure and being moved as far as we've moved them towards state line, I can tell you all day long it'll be a non-inch issue, but I don't know any other way to say it. That won't be loud. And I'm not a decibel guy either, and I don't claim to tell you I can explain these studies and all. All I know is that we paid people to go out there and do a study. We didn't tell them to rig it in any certain way at all. We said, go out here to one of our vac huts and do this study and give us whatever the results are. We just know it's not loud, and we hadn't been concerned about it. It hadn't been a problem anywhere else since we've been enclosing the vacuum structures, for sure. As for the number of vacuums, the property size does dictate what we do on vacuums, and like Thomas said, most of our locations on the low end have 18. We have some locations that have as many as 30 vacuums, and we've found that just from customer demands, the worst thing in the world is for a customer to pull out, and we've advertised, hey, if you buy a car wash from us, you can use our vacuums, and it's unlimited as far as the amount of time you want to spend cleaning your car out. A lot of people don't even use them, but when we do have busier days and people are using them, the customers really get frustrated if they're pulling out there and there's not a vacuum available. That's when they get a sour taste in their mouth, and we're trying to be customer oriented, and I don't see that they're going to be full all the time, but I do think it'd be very detrimental to shave off 2 or 3 vacuum spots. That was a big deal when we were moving that vacuum hut from the end where the residents are, moving it over. If we're going to have to give up a vacuum spot, and that is a big deal to us. And I don't really know any other way to explain that either, but the customers do appreciate having access to those vacuums, especially on busier days. What this is not is what the older car washes used to have, those individual canister vacuums that you put coins in, and that's individual motors at every single station. We've completely eliminated that when we've gone to the centralized systems. It's just a lot more efficient.
Same one as the one on back.
Okay.
Jeffrey,
Okay.
I wonder if, do you guys have a detail service at the end of it? So are there people that
We
take
do
care
not,
of the cars?
we do not detail or towel dry the vehicles at the end. So,
I wonder if that's a difference.
Same situation at Big Splash. You're not going to convince me. I know what it is.
Okay, no, I'm just
It's the same thing. You go
I'm just
down
saying,
to the
because
vacuum,
I
they
bet
put
half
all
the
the
people
bags and
at that
towels.
one go to the service where the people vacuum it out. Yeah, okay, okay.
That's the one I'm referring to is just like this.
Oh, yeah, no, the
For-
zigzag roof one on Metcalf.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Half the people go to get their vacuum done, and the other half go to the self-serve.
Basically shut down the detail.
Oh, really?
They've almost shut it down. Yeah, they don't do it anymore. When they automate it.
We'll talk about that later.
So I got just one
Sure,
more quick question.
sure.
Sorry. Or not question, comment. The fence
we did have, I think, 7 neighbors came to our meeting a couple weeks ago. The worst-case scenario on the fence is to do, unfortunately, like Panda has next door, is a kind of a fence that's staggered that you can actually, at certain angles, look straight through it. You can, headlights can shine through it, sound can go through it, you can see through it. It's all the things that we don't want. And all of us are very familiar with, obviously, a wooden fence over time warps and the boards fall off and all that kind of stuff. So we've gone to contractors and have been directed to Simtech is the name of this company. And did we have any samples of that fence?
Samples are in the box.
That's a material
We
board
don't
for.
have an actual sample of the fence, but we can certainly do that between now and the final plan approval, but.
This fence is about 3 to 4 times more expensive than a regular wood fence, and it's. We'll put up whatever kind of fence y'all and the neighbors decide, and whatever color you want, it doesn't matter, you know.
Mr. Burkle?
From the decibel levels from the vacuum systems that you're using, you have the house, the vacuum house or station, and then you have the wash itself. And just understanding a little bit of the information that you've sent and a little bit of things that are online as far as where I think some of the information actually correlates with, it seems as though that within 150 feet, you would still be around 70 decibels, which seems to be quite loud.
You're talking about the end of the wash where those dryers are located.
Yeah, or the house. And I just, in trying to help maybe solve this, you know, I see that on the vacuum enclosure, you've got the steel expanded webbing at the top. Have you ever included closing that? Yeah, that one. Closing that up?
This is the vacuum enclosure building, which we relocated from the west end to the east end. But that study was done at a similar facility that we had just opened, similar building enclosure, and within 25 feet of this building, the decibel level was less than 2 people standing 3 to 5 feet apart talking.
But the south, and then it labels the southeast of dryers.
Yeah, that's the tunnels that we turned and reoriented. The dryers are on this end, basically pointing back towards State Line Road and Missouri.
Measurements done on the west end of the tunnel?
Yes. Now, at the location where those measurements were actually taken, they could only go about 100 feet before, again, they were standing in a public road. So the ambient noise from the road, you know, overrode what we were actually able to measure, or the consultant was able to measure from the dryers themselves.
Well, if you double, basically dropping 6 decibels per doubling of distance, you'd probably be somewhere around, you know, 78, 76 decibels on the. What I'm trying to do is get an understanding of what it's going to be like to be a neighbor and hear this pretty much running constantly. And I agree with Jeff's comment of I don't know, unless there was something to be done as softening the decibel level. It's not probably going to be done with landscape or a wall of kinds. I'm just concerned that I don't know if it's a solvable issue.
Right. Well, and that's why we reoriented the site. So it's like a megaphone. If you're standing at the end of it, you're going to hear the blast. If you're standing behind it, you're not getting that same noise level. That's the orientation or reorientation of the site plan to try to accomplish that.
Understand, understand.
The other thing is the hours of operation of our facility is very much in line with, residential hours, when any other industrial facility, et cetera, and some of the other noise ordinances of local jurisdictions in the neighboring area. It's like, 9 o'clock, lights out, sound out, or 10 o'clock, lights out, sound out, and the same thing, not before 7 a.m. or 8 a.m. in the morning. So I think our hours of operation, help solve a lot of the noise concerns as well.
Mr. Brewster, what is the new hours of operation for contractors in the city?
I should follow my own advice from earlier, right?
Thanks.
Sorry about that. 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. is what the city's noise ordinance lists. So their proposed hours of operation are well within.
Well, their proposed were 8 to 8, but we're proposing a little flexibility from 7 to 9, right? Okay.
Yes, and we've had, been in conversations, thanks to Chris's introduction to the fire marshal, and provided that auto turn. He conceptually thinks that is a solution. Again, we just need to fine tune the provision for that hammerhead, for that, emergency vehicle access. But yeah, we see that as a very solvable concern.
I have a couple of questions. The fencing that you're proposing, does it have any sound barrier quality to it?
It does. I don't have any technical data on that. I believe it's the Iowa DOT recognizes its use as a sound barrier fence as well, but I don't have any technical material at this time to tell you it's going to reduce sound levels by X percent.
Okay.
But it is it's a 100% opaque and solid fence, whereas the shadow box fence that you typically see for a privacy fence, does allow more light and potential noise to pass through.
Okay. Can you go back to the visual of the fence with the evergreen on it? Because I didn't understand. I thought I heard you say that there was chain link fence there.
Yes, ma'am. Actually, the physical property line of this property is in the backyard of several of these residences. The existing chain link fence was installed years ago during the development of the office building within 2 to 5 feet of the deeded property line. So rather than go back and say, okay, well, we're going to go and take this fence and we're going to set it on the property line, what we propose to do is, in essence, allow this portion between the property line and the existing chain link fence, which over time has become utilized by the adjoining property owners to the northwest, leave that intact, and then we start our land disturbance at the existing chain link fence. In this portion where this cross section was actually made, we're actually raising the grade from what is there today, and then installing the new privacy fence, 10, 12 feet in from the actual property line itself, and then proposing a row of, continuous hedge of, large shrubs, between on the residential side of the fence versus basically, putting a fence here or at the property line, that helps, was to try to help soften the fence. There are some existing vegetation and trees that are located along the property line now on our side and on the residential side, which we'll be able to maintain. The ongoing issue, whether it be the office building, Slim Chickens, Tidal Wave, or anybody else, is this property line also serves as a center line of a KCP&L easement. So they're coming through, clipping the trees and, pruning things back on a regular basis. So by going with this plan, we actually offset the new plant material outside of the KCP&L easement, then put the fence on the back side to try to help soften that over the long term for the residential adjoining neighborhood.
So if you have a solid wall and you're putting vegetation on the west side of the solid wall in between the chain link fence, you're creating kind of a no man's land, it sounds like. And how and who is going to maintain that vegetation back there?
And I think Chris spoke to that earlier. I mean, obviously, we can, this fence will be ordered specific for the site, and we can incorporate, access ports or doors, gates to get there. But Chris mentioned that in his presentation, that the applicant would be responsible for maintaining that landscape buffer.
And I know that we say that, but a lot of times it never happens, and then it becomes unsightly. So I'm cautioning you that this may not be quite as viable as it sounds.
And we're certainly open to suggestions, but, this design basically came out of some of the feedback from reviewing the 2015 public hearing discussions, and some previous discussions with Mr. Woolridge.
And you're looking, this looks like it's a fairly good size tree or evergreen that you're putting in there. And I don't want something that's this big going in as vegetation and going, oh, it's gonna grow. I think we need to be specific about the height of the evergreens or the caliper that goes in there.
And we're open to putting the trees on our side of the fence. We just felt like by the neighborhood meeting that the neighbors would want the trees on their side. And we'll, like I said, we'll maintain them and everything we can do to keep them growing and make sure that they go in at a certain height. And I don't know that I can buy them in a 6 foot already, off a truck, 6 feet tall. I don't know if.
Well, I don't know what the width is even between what would be the fence and the.
This is probably 9 to 11 feet in between.
Oh, 11 feet?
Right.
Okay.
And the
looks like it's
material
not
that.
big in your picture.
Right. Well, the material that, the plant, proposed plant here, and we can certainly have some more discussions during the evolution to final plans with the city's arborist, is to put in something that's an evergreen that, has a good growth rate, that is hardy, low maintenance, and will reach, this particular, plant material here has a 12 to 15 foot mature height, a 6 to 10 foot width or spread, which we felt would help to fill that up without getting up into KCP&L's chainsaws. So it would provide a good permanent buffer.
Great. And how many cars can you stack in on the original plan?
Well, I mean, if you parked them bumper to bumper, which doesn't happen, from the time they come off a State Line Road and around, there's probably in excess of 30 cars. I mean, but that's bumper to bumper.
Okay. And the pole heights, have we talked about the pole heights, the light poles?
We mentioned it as something that we'll want to verify at the final plan. We didn't see the heights on there, but we saw the photometrics that showed it was meeting the performance criteria of the ordinance.
So that we can minimize the light pollution.
Right.
And how far is the entrance to the, I think it's the exit of Panda Express next door? What, do we know? Because if we have 30 cars being able to stack in tightly, but some people may be still ending up on State Line Road, I just want to make sure we're not blocking their entrance or exit. I think it's an exit.
We have sites that are as low as maybe 8 or 9 cars to stack. We can process very quickly.
Yeah, I think
So
I read
can promise
3.5 minutes or something.
Right, we can load a new vehicle onto the conveyor about every 40 seconds. If we get busy, we can load way faster than 1 per minute.
Okay.
And so there'll never be 30-plus cars backed up there.
Okay, great.
It just won't happen.
Okay. Okay, I think that's my questions.
To piggyback onto the light pole height question, I think it would be helpful to understand maybe like a cross-section through the site into the residences so that maybe we could see and understand how potentially light across this parking field would affect or bleed into. I'm just not, like Mr. Woolridge, I'm sorry, forgot exactly, noted that, you know, something about how his patio is kind of up higher. So I kind of want to make sure that we understand that there's not a light cone or like this solid, you know, line of light that's really polluting the residents in any way. I think that would be useful to understand.
Yeah, we've prepared a photometric plan, but it was basically showing the foot candles at ground level. The level of detail that you know, Chris was referring to, you know, previously would be, you know, specification of pole heights, et cetera, to embellish that plan. So there was more detail, but again, we were, you know, considering that would be part of the final development plan approval. But the photometric plan that we showed, even without consideration by the designer of the fence along the residential portions, you know, we were at 0 foot candles by the time we were at the property line of the residence. And again, by having the property line, the chain link fence, the buffer, the fence, the light poles on the other side creates more separation between the actual light fixture and the residential property. And there's also will be some shielding that will be involved, you know, in the adjustment of the pole heights for the final design of the photometrics.
Sure, I understand the way that the foot candles will taper off, you know, on the ground level, but I do think that you would still potentially see the cone of light, even if, you know, it's tapered off visually.
Right.
You'd see it in the distance, potentially. I just don't have a full grasp of how the grading works as you get into the residences.
Yeah, maybe that comment, it's a good comment because it might help, not just with the photometrics, but for
Everything,
we're talking
yeah.
about the fence, we're talking about the noise, we're talking about that. It might just be a really great exercise to, which all it is pop a little cube in SketchUp and wherever it looks like you got this in like a SketchUp, you just need to grab some elevations and show a couple mock-ups of houses to get a decent cross-section. I think it will help better define whether our concerns are valid. I think, you know, maybe some of them will not be valid after you kind of can show that in a more, a better frame of reference.
Does anybody need to see the samples that they brought with them, the sample board or the sample items? I don't know what they brought, but.
Let's try up here.
which seems to be missing.
Yeah, you got them.
Lost in translation, lost in transportation.
This is the split face CMU, and then this is sample of the veneer stone.
Okay. I'm going to show it to Mr. Burkle and Mr. Wolf. Does anybody have any other questions for Mr. Brewster or for our Tidal Wave friends? Lost all.
Yeah, okay, one quick question. Do you guys really use less water? Like, is that proven? Like, I could look that up on the
yeah.
internet and...
And it's part of the high-pressure nozzles. There is some reuse between, the initial wash or rinse water that's being able to use. So between the technology and actually, one of the principles of Tidal Wave is a chemical engineer. So he spent a lot of time trying to figure out what's the most efficient way to get the cleanest car through this process.
I'll tell you a little bit more about that. When I mentioned earlier, you can't recycle every bit of the water. For instance, there's a tire shine machine at the end that applies a tire shine on the car's tires. You can't take, if it's water-based or silicone-based, depending on what you use, but you can't take that runoff that goes in your pit and blends with water. You can't take that and recycle that water. So that we have to run through separators, but we can't recycle that. The equipment's just not designed to handle that. But we do. We recycle all the high-pressure stuff that Thomas was talking about. When you recycle water, you can get it. Say you wash a car and you get the water dirty. Once you go to recycle it, you can get it about 85% back clean, but that 15% you can't get all the way. So you don't want to take water that's 85% clean and mix it with chemicals and start washing another car with it. Or there is in the rinse process, when you rinse the car after you've put the chemicals on it, you've washed it, all the brushes have done what they've done, you've put all the waxes on. At the very end, you've got to do a final rinse, and that's got to be a very special, what's called a reverse osmosis treatment. It's got to be a pure water rinse, and so you can't use the reclaimed water for that. But the items in the car wash that use the most amount of water is for the wheel cleaning down low, the undercarriage that sprays under the vehicles, and then up top we just use a lot of high pressure, and that's where that water doesn't have. We can use the 85% clean water for those applications which use the most amount of water. If that helps kind of explain what we can and can't use on recycling. We recycle as much as we possibly can.
So you have 5 parking spaces for employees, and did I hear you say you had 4 employees on site at all times or most of the time?
The total operation will employ about 12 people, but at a given time, only 4 or 5 will be working at any given time. On a slower day, we may have 3 people. We'll never have less than 3. On a really busy day, we may have 4 or 5.
Okay. All right. Are we ready? Okay, I'll entertain a motion.
Fellow commissioners, do we have enough information for us to vote today? Based upon some of the concerns I heard, I don't want to, do you want the lighting issue that we talked about or anything like that? Do we want that before we vote?
Well, we don't have the lighting issue. We don't have the definitive fire department emergency vehicle. We're trying to build that in. We don't have the poles, lighting in poles. The vacuum location. The thickness of the canopies has not been resolved. What was the other items?
Most of those, I believe, are ones where we and the applicant know the criteria and the standard to be met prior to final development plan. For example, the lighting, they have to meet the city's ordinance requirement, and their photometric plan demonstrates that they will. We just want to see the heights and the cutoff shields to see that fuller picture. That's usually a final development plan issue. Same with the emergency access, and talking with the fire marshal today and the applicant, we were confident that we all know what issue we're trying to solve, and it can be solved prior to final development plan without substantial changes to this. The canopy one, obviously all the building elevations, they've submitted preliminary elevations, and that's to be expected this time. If there is if you all want to suggest or consider a change to the canopy, I don't feel like we know enough about what you're looking for or what they would be willing to do with regard to that. That would be the only issue, because we would need a little more guidance or criteria for them if that was an issue, or if that's something they can't consider, we need to know that now as well, so we don't get back to final plan with a different canopy. That would be the only one. All of the other ones, I'm confident that we can get the information prior to final development plan.
I think the other item was signage. We have not addressed signage at all, so, but that's final. That's final.
I, for one, have concerns about the proposed edits they have to the 5-year. I mean, this is our leverage point here, and I'm uncomfortable giving them automatic renewal based upon the problems we've had in that particular area with other businesses. So I can't, in good conscience, vote for the edit they want because of what's happened to these neighbors with respect to the fast food restaurant there. So, but subject to that, I don't necessarily have a problem with what they're proposing. So,
That page.
what's that?
I would be okay, with a 10-year, with like a mandatory 5-year audit or something like that.
How long do you need to make your lender comfortable?
It's on a 15-year amortization, so
Okay.
they probably want to know that it'll get paid off in 15 years.
Well,
Is that operating? Yeah.
A 5 or 10-year.
My point is, I want you to have to come back in here, and I want to make sure these neighbors are not upset about something, and it's not going to be 15 years. I'm not going to give you that long. At least I'm not going to vote for that. The question is, how long do we give you? I would be willing to give you more than 5 probably, but I'm not going to give you a lot more than that, in my opinion.
Madam Chair, if I could answer that question. We have no reservations at all coming back to you, the Planning Commission, to confirm our compliance and satisfaction with the criteria of approval. What we're trying to avoid is a discretionary process where we not only come to Planning Commission, but then go back up to the council, and for political reasons, not legitimate land use planning reasons, we get denied. But if you want us to come back in 5 years to prove compliance or confirm compliance with the criteria of approval, and that confirmation is the arbiter of an extension, that's really all we're going for. The word automatic may be what's giving you more trouble than is necessary. We just want, if we've got 5 round pegs and we've got 5 round holes, if they're all in the right place, then we would get renewal. If we don't, we're done. But we can control the compliance. Give us the ability to control the compliance, driving the renewal, and we're
So
happy.
your concern is you want it to be just our body that addresses it, as opposed to having all the way go up to the city council?
Whether it is the planning commission or the council that reviews our compliance is not really the important factor with us. It's knowing that if we review the compliance and establish compliance, the renewal will occur.
Like to make a comment.
Yes, I would. We actually have a special use permit renewal coming to the Planning Commission next month that I was just reviewing that you all. And one of the conditions of that approval was that it did not have to go back to council for renewal. It just had to come back to the planning commission for approval. And as long as the applicant hadn't had any code enforcement violations over that 2-year period and was still in compliance with all of the conditions in the special use permit, the planning commission had the discretion to renew that special use permit for as long as it would like to without going back through the council process. So I just wanted to make you aware that that is a practice you have done in the past, if that's something the planning commission would like to consider doing again.
So the wording that has been provided to us was based on staff's determination that the special use continues to meet the criteria. And do you want to add that it will be renewed by the planning commission in there?
I don't think Chris or I have any concerns with the way that their current proposal is worded, but I'm hearing on the planning commission that there is, so I think that would be a good compromise, that you say it has to come back to the planning commission instead of to staff. I don't have concerns.
I have a problem with automatically, because what my point is the ticket that the Chinese restaurant got, is that a code violation? Is that what that is? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, if there's any kind of property maintenance, code enforcement issue, and there's a lot of things someone could be in violation of, and if it's really in our system, and we track all complaints we get on properties, so I can very easily go back and look at an address and see over a time period, was there ever a complaint filed on this property?
Is that renewal that you just described that's next month?
I haven't discussed this in detail with Chris yet, because I just read that staff report today, and that would be one of my questions for him at our staff meeting this week. So I don't know if David or Chris.
I mean,
Yeah.
I would add, I guess there's a difference here. I mean, the language being proposed is that there be a determination that special use continues to meet the criteria of the original approval. You know, I don't know that every single thing that might be a possible violation is, you know, in some way might be an actual criteria. It might violate the ordinance in some way, but it might be a specific criteria. So I think what they're looking for is, we've got a specific list that's on 2 to 3 pages here. But if, you know, I don't even think of anything that could happen in the city code, if there's any one thing that isn't a specific, that is applicable to the Burger King, or to anybody else that might do business, that might be where the issue might need some language tweaking. If you're wanting to go that broad, that it's any violation of anything, that would be different than the language being proposed here.
Yes, that would be a code violation.
That would be dependent on probably the neighbors and other people monitoring it who have a bird's eye view of it. I mean, I would not be able to see that from a public standpoint.
Correct, and, you know, someone could make a complaint about something, and our code enforcement officers will put it in the system to investigate it. It doesn't mean that it's automatically found to be a violation, but we would investigate it and see, and I agree with what David's point is, so.
I don't know prosecutors, you know, how they work on things that, you know, not every even thing that is a violation necessarily goes to court and is imposed with a fine either. You know, sometimes violations are administered with just corrective actions, a letter, please correct within that way. So if you want to take it to the point where that's not an option, I mean, I suppose you could, but that's not what this wording says, at least.
What I would suggest language-wise is, instead of automatically renewing, I'm just trying to find that page.
On this, it's in this packet. It's about the last page, third from the bottom. Yeah, almost. Maybe the third more.
Here we go.
Next last page and one more in. So whatever that is.
So the special use permit shall be valid for a period of 5 years and will renew for successive 5-year periods if no code violations exist during that 5-year period, and all conditions have been or continue to be met. But my point is, I'd like to make sure, because while you all seem like great people, 4 years from now, this could be run by somebody else who buys your business and may not be as motivated to make this work the way it should. And so that's the contingency we have to worry about. And I just want to make sure we have the stick, so to speak, to make that happen.
We agree in your revised language. Hits the point. I just didn't want to change staff's language too much. That was how I was constraining it, but your language takes care of our concern.
Madam Chair, with the acceptance of that language and the addition of 2E as a condition, as articulated by Mr. Brewster, I would move to approve, make sure I say this right, application PC 2018-02. Are there two applications, or is it just?
Yes, you'd be recommending approval of the amended preliminary development plan, and then you're also recommending approval of the special use permit, and they would both be subject to the same conditions. I do have a question on number 8 and the rewording. I have it down as, the special use permit shall be valid for a period of 5 years and shall renew for successive 5 years, for successive 5-year periods if no code violations are found and all conditions continue to be met. So I guess for the applicant and for you, it says it's going to renew at that 5-year period. As staff, we're going to go back to the ordinance and go, well, how do you renew it? Well, you renew it by coming back here. Is that what you intend, and does that meet your interest?
Language, and if I need to add a sentence, will be the applicant has the burden to come forward at the end of the 5-year period and prove compliance.
And I think the applicant's interest is that when they come back, it's not a matter of going through all the criteria we've just went through. It's a matter of going through this plan and making sure you're meeting everything. Okay.
And that there are no code violations.
Yes. Yes.
I would like to make a comment on Amendment 7. Would the applicant be open to dropping the level of decibels from 65 to 60 between the times of 7 a.m. and 10 p.m. and 50 decibels between the hours of 10 p.m. and 7 a.m.?
Before I answer yes, could you one more time walk
Sure.
through the timeframes and the decibels?
On number 7 of the plan amendments, you have listed maximum of 65 decibels between 7 a.m. and 10 p.m. Okay, 9 p.m. Okay.
No, he's saying 10 p.m.
Operation hours are 7 a.m. to 9 p.m.
Our condition was drawn on more of what typical noise ordinances do, and that usually it's a 10 p.m. cutoff. I didn't want to draw it right at when their business hours could be, so it was more modeling.
We're kind of expanding and expanding and expanding here, and I'm having a problem with that, so.
You have a separate hours of operation stipulation as well.
I'm sorry, Mr. Waters?
There's a separate hours of operation stipulation as well in 5C, at least that I'm showing.
Well, but aren't the decibels based on operations? I mean, if
Yeah,
they're
why
not
would they need
operating, they're not gonna have
Yeah,
that type of.
the condition came more from what noise ordinances typically do, so it wasn't necessarily to match just the operation. I didn't know if there was, I mean, it certainly could. I don't see why it couldn't, but it was just more of, different stuff could be going on after 9, I don't know.
I wanna tighten it down, so that there's no, misconception as to what the hours of operation would be and how long we expect them to have that. So, Mr. Burkle, I'm sorry I interrupted you.
I believe 7 a.m. to 9 p.m.
7 to 9.
for our operators.
Asking if you would be open to having from 65 decibels during the 7 to 9 period instead of 65, from 65 to 60, and from 55 decibels to 50 decibels between the hours of 9 and 7 a.m. sorry, 9 PM, my apologies, and 7 AM.
Hold on. If you look at the page before the conditions on page 12, you'll see the decibel levels at the residential area can run in a range between 60 decibels and 70 decibels from, that would be typical residential neighborhood to residential neighborhood. And we're not a residential use, and we would be below what is permitted in most communities, residential neighborhood to residential neighborhood. We can comply with the residential decibels, and I think that's how staff drafted the ordinance.
That table actually is a range of what we surveyed of where noise ordinances typically draw their decibel ranges at. So I believe they're measured from the impacting property. I didn't study them all, but what we found was most noise ordinances had a limit during those daytime hours. In other words, the most strict one was at 60 during those daytime business hours. The most lenient one was at 70. So that's what that range is referring to. You want to be at the lower end of that range rather than the higher. I get you.
The 50 decibel from what I think is now 9 p.m. to 7 a.m. is not an issue because we don't operate during those times. The 65 decibels is the middle range of residential use, and we can hit that 65, which is why we agreed with the staff condition as written. If wind is blowing in a certain way from north to west, it's possible that we'll get above 60 quite easily. But we have high confidence that 65 is achievable. I just don't want to knowingly agree to a condition that there will be times when I'm going to be above 60 decibels, but very, very, very rare, if ever, which means I'm willing to take the risk of never going above 65.
62.4 decibels, as an example, would you be complying, would you comply with 62.4 as the information you've provided?
Again, measured at the west property line, if there's that north wind, east wind blowing the drier noise from state line to the west, I could get 64 and a half. I just don't want to buy a problem on that one chance on a random day where we have a 40 mile an hour wind from the east, and we seem to be having those a lot lately. I could be 64.
Typically, we're arguing over wind. It's typically when you do decibel readings, there's a reason why in the top left corner they talk about the conditions, and they usually actually try to do the readings on a condition that is, I would say, average in nature. Yes, so it's.
Okay, so are you good with the way it stands then?
I'd like to see it say 60.
I'd just like to note that in their acoustic report that they're reporting that the sound level could be expected to be 68 at a distance approximately 139 feet away from some point that's established. So, so it's in the staff report, and it's after all of the white Goss letterhead in the arpeggio. Graphs, starting from the back. That next page of text is the arpeggio report. Requirement to number these.
and everything towards state line.
So this report is prior to the site plan change?
Yeah, but no,
No.
the data you just read is independent of where that location is. What we don't know is where 139 feet falls from the dryer.
Yeah.
From
So,
the dryers, yeah.
again, graphics proving things are beneficial.
Well, I think it's more, am I correct, Mr. Burkle, you're more concerned about the homeowners? Okay, so do we know how many feet are between the dryers and the fence?
The dryers, well, I know measuring the relocated vacuum house to the closest residential property is around 140 feet. So from the dryers to the nearest residential property, again, is probably 200 feet. The measurements that were done in the Arpeggio report on the dryers were basically at the end of the megaphone in direct projection from the end of the tunnel. And then there were some, side ranges, which in this case are both into commercial property. So again, that's why we took the tunnel, reconfigured the site plan, so, the loudest thing that we have is directly adjoining and pointed towards State Line Road. As a reference to 60 decibels.
Is noisy, right?
I'm sorry?
The vacuum hut.
Yes. Well, no. The vacuum hut, no. The vacuum hut is controlled. The dryers, we can't,
Controlled through the mesh top.
right, well, we can't put a hut over every car that comes through to be dried and then raise it up. So they're coming out the end of the tunnel.
I think she's talking about the hut where the central canister is.
Yeah, that's where the vacuum hut or enclosure is located there, So 25 feet from that hut, right there in this adjoining driveway, we're less than 65 decibels. As a reference, two people talking, having a conversation 3 feet apart exceeds 60 decibels. So, that 65, with the equipment, we can certainly control that, but if we're saying that we've got to be underneath 60 at any point in any time, and we have a couple employees come over here and have a conversation, are we now potentially in violation? So, that's the hesitancy to go to 60.
I'm not asking about conversations, I'm asking about the distances, and it looks like for every time you double the distance, you drop 6 decibels. So the dropping of decibels between, what we're talking about here is quite, decibels are quite loud in the criteria. And I'm just asking, is the being between 60 and 70, and if we could be on the low end of that, and that seems to be within all the neighbors that we're trying to address.
That's the dryers, that's not the vacuum house, that's the dryers.
When you do these decibel studies, we're not looking to have a one-day gotcha, right? I mean, is it, so what I'm looking for is a study that says, on average, over a period of, 10 days, 20 days, 30 days, you're at a certain number, right? So the day where your employee goes and has a conversation, I'm sure the people monitoring that are gonna take that into account, but, and maybe the better way of asking is, can you say on a given 10-day stretch, you can average 60? So some days you may be louder, some days you may be softer.
If we put one of these in an isolated pasture with no other roads or businesses around that, we probably could. But the issue is these things are located like State Line Road on an arterial highway. There's other ambient noises outside of what we can control. So, and that was one of the issues when we had this arpeggio study done, is how can we get nothing but the tunnels, you know, at 100 feet? Well, we couldn't. We're in the road. We have oncoming traffic. So I don't know that I can physically get a, you know, sound consultant to be able to produce that. I mean, I don't know that there's a physical location where they can get measurements at 100, 150 feet from the dryers where they're not going to be, you know, impacted by some other, you know, outside influence.
Well, I mean, isn't that what they do? I mean, that's true for everything, right? They monitor, there's other ambient noise, right? I'm no expert on this, and I don't know anything about how it works, but
Could I suggest that we add that we modify the condition? Let us do the study, and we have to present and agree to the number at council. And that, we've already committed that number will not exceed 65.
Right.
That between now and the time we go to council, we conduct a study, work with staff to explore our ability to reduce the decibel below 65 decibels. And we'll provide staff with that study showing the various points at the property line. What is the noise going to be from emanating to the west property line? And if the study says that I'm making a number up, if the study says 50, that's in the study. If the study says 62.5, that's the number we'll say. I just don't know that tonight, I can give you the definitive answer. I can give you the commitment that we'll do the study, and before we go to council, we will have agreed to the maximum average decibel not exceeding a number. No more than the number we've already agreed to, 65, and hopefully less.
I would like to know is what is the noise right now? It seems to me if you go and measure it right now and then compare it to however you do it to measure your noise level, you'll have a good sense of, hey, we're only adding a little bit to the mix, we're adding a lot to the mix.
I agree. There's some baselines that need to be established for comparison purposes.
I will amend my pending motion to add another condition that the applicant have to prepare a sound study that is presented to the city council that justifies the decibel level and recognize planning commission's recommendation, and I'm speaking for Jonathan and myself right now, but I think others might agree, is 60, and recognizing the applicant agrees today that they can comply with 65.
That's an addendum to number 7, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so number 7 stays the same. The site shall meet a performance standard measured from an adjacent residential property of a maximum of 60 decibels between 7 a.m. and 9 p.m. And there should be 55 decibels, it says, between the hours of 9 p.m. and 7 a.m., noting that they are not in operation during that time. Okay, and then the applicant.
Madam Chair, I just want to confirm, I guess I'd understood Mr. Wolf's motion that number was going to say 65 for right now, subject to the study. And the number I think you just read was 60. I just want to make sure I understood in Mr. Wolf's motion that the original language would stay the same at 65 and 55 at this time, subject to the language he presented about it.
Okay, I'm sorry.
So I'll leave it at 65. And I'd add an additional sentence. The applicant is committed to doing a sound study to determine more specifically what the noise pollution will be, or I guess noise pollution is the right word, and presenting that to City Council for approval.
not coming back to the planning
Not
commission?
coming back to the planning commission.
Okay.
And planning commission's recommendation is that the level should be 60. If my fellow commissioners agree with that.
If I'd phrase it, the word recommendation, because you're making a recommendation within a.
The planning commission's goal would be that it would be 60. Yeah. Is the applicant okay with that?
Yes. Have you got that, Joyce?
Perfect.
You did want the hours of that to match the business hours, though.
Yes,
then
and we did that, 7 a.m.
the
to 9.
evening one at 50, which was acceptable to them, would go down as well, so that'd be.
Well, yeah, 55, I think we were leaving it at 55, weren't we? The hours of 9 p.m. They're not in operation. Okay, so 50 is still good, okay. All right, put 50 back in. Alrighty. So we have an addendum to number 7 and an addendum to number 2E, talking about sufficient maneuvering for emergency vehicles under 2E. Any other addendums to the recommendations?
I'd like to include the study of the light level pollution creep onto the, that's the official wording, onto the neighboring.
Okay, so that would be 2D, indicate pole heights, specific location of lights to show performance criteria on the
Yeah.
photometric plan. And what?
Chris, you had kind of like the way that the canopies are shielding.
Typically, under
light.
that condition, what we would be looking for, the fixture, the cutoff shields, they have very specific performance criteria with each lighting type. And so that's what we would be looking for, the location of it, the height, and then the type of shield, and that confirms the.
I think it would be a
Madam Chair, I think that
beyond a,
the right
beyond
approach
a
here might be
photometric
to
plan.
have a second to Mr. Wolf's motion, and then if he wants to accept further addendas to his motion, but I still think we don't have a second even to that, and then, so we've got a motion and a second, now for up for discussion, if there are other proposed amendments, then Mr. Wolf.
Got lost in the process
His
when I had to
motion,
take a
so.
moment. So, I'm sorry. It's been moved by Mr. Wolf and seconded by Mr. Burkle to approve PC 2018-02 and PC 2018-102. And so now we're working on the light pollution. So right now, we've indicated the pole heights and the specific location of the lights, and to show performance criteria on the photometric plan in 2D.
I would say indicate through a graphic representation how the photometrics of the light details cast light across to the neighboring residences.
So, and indicate, I can't even read my own writing, through a graphic demonstration of light projection?
Yeah, sure, projection from the fixtures onto.
Okay. Alrighty. Okay, how does that sound to number 2D with that addendum?
That's fine.
Okay, good.
I accept that amendment.
Excellent. Anybody else? Any other addendums? Ready for a vote? All right, all those in favor, raise your hand. All those opposed? And Mr. Valentino is opposed. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
We'll see you. If nothing more, in 5 years.
Yeah.
Next up, and finally, we have a public hearing for a rezoning from R1A to 1 to R1 LP. Does that look like, is that supposed to be a B? It looks like an LP.
The agenda was changed. It is B, but I think the original agenda had P on it.
Okay. Do we need to open the public hearing on this tonight? Or is it a continuance?
Both. I can explain why.
Do we need to see the applicant? Is the applicant here? Okay. The applicant is not here, and Mr. Brewster will give us an update.
So this was, he submitted his application, advertised for his public hearing, and then when we met this week, or last week, I guess, for a pre-meeting, he indicated that he held his neighborhood meeting, but no one showed. Then he found out that his notice did not include the neighborhood meeting as he was instructed. So he brought that problem to our attention. So we suggested he needs to continue this application, rescind, not for noticing this hearing, but rescind for his own private neighborhood meeting, to speak with neighbors, and then come back in March.
I need to open the public hearing and have a
Probably
motion.
the best approach, since this was noticed for the public hearing tonight, is to go ahead and open it, and if people want to speak, it's your discretion, allow them, and then to accept a motion to go ahead and continue the public hearing until the March 6th meeting.
The applicant is not here. I will open the public hearing. If anyone would like to speak to the lot split at 7540 Reinhardt. Just give us your name and address and tell us what you think.
My name is Denny Nolan, live at 7601 Reinhardt, Prairie Village. I worked construction for over 34 years. I have a couple of concerns. Number one, the property is fenced in to keep children out during the building process. The other thing I have a concern about is, will both houses be built at the same time? The other question I have is Republic trash service. Can they get down the street with vehicles on both sides? Will we be able to get our trash out? They won't always stop and move the barrel. They'll go on. And I'd like to know a projected finish date, because we have not received anything. We've lived in our home for 30 years, and so I'm in favor of the houses being built as long as the contractor adheres to the codes of Prairie Village. We are very concerned about that. I noticed a lot of the houses that are being built, torn down and rebuilt, are being fenced in, mainly to keep children out. We have 10 grandchildren. So I just want to be sure of a safety factor in this. I thought our builder would probably be here tonight, but he's not. So those are our concerns, and I think probably the concerns of the neighborhood. If you'd keep that in mind, I'd really appreciate it.
Well, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else?
Just for your information, sir, the informational meeting will be held on Tuesday, next Tuesday, February 13th, in City Hall at the multipurpose room, beginning at 6:30.
Okay,
And you will be receiving a notice that was to be mailed today.
okay.
So there will be an
It's
information
certified,
meeting.
right?
No, not for the
This one,
informational
okay.
meeting. So
Okay.
next Tuesday, 6:30, back
All
here
right.
again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Do I have a motion to continue this item then?
Second.
Moved by Mr. Wolf, seconded by Ms. Brown. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. And lastly, we have a non-public hearing on 5200 West 95th. I understand that the applicant has asked us to table this item?
Yes, that's correct. We heard from the applicant today, and they've asked us to table it to March, and they said they'd follow up with us if anything changed, and we don't really have much more information than that.
So, are we tabling it, or are we continuing it into March?
I think in this case, it's really 6 of one, half dozen of the other.
Okay. Do we need a motion?
Always a good idea, I think, to generally to have a motion to table these matters.
By Mr. Wolf, seconded by Ms. Brown, that we will table this item to the March 6th meeting. Okay. Anything else to come before the Planning Commission tonight?
I have one quick thing, and I know
Oh,
everyone.
I'm sorry, we have to vote, yeah. I'm sorry.
Hi.
Okay, thank you. That was unanimous vote. Sporadically, but, I'm sorry, my head is starting to explode, and I'm losing
Bring
it
enough
tonight. I
medication
am
for-
losing it.
For the marathon meeting, did you?
Oh, my gosh. I felt pretty good coming in, and boy, I'm going downhill.
I know, I'm pretty sure I'm up for the first feeding in like 15 minutes.
We're out of here almost. Anything, Jamie?
Yes, just something quick. I know we're dying to get out of here. Kind of related to that note, the Committee on Committees, that's Council Ad Hoc Committee, has been meeting recently to make recommendations to the council on committee changes. And one of the recommendations that came up recently was moving the start time of the Planning Commission up from 7 p.m. to 6 p.m. I know a lot of you have jobs that keep you late sometimes, and they don't want to make that recommendation officially unless the Planning Commission buys into that and it fits within your availability. So just trying to get a pulse of where you all would, your meeting would move it to 6 instead of 7.
Be at 5:30.
Mhm.
The problem is, I would personally, I can do a 6:30 planning and a 6 o'clock BZA.
Okay.
But I can't, but if you're pushing planning to 6 and BZA is 5:30,
Mhm.
I could never make BZA.
Okay.
One suggestion I would make is if we're gonna do that, we might consider providing some food for us. Just because it's kind of hard to get here and get food. I mean, it's a challenge for me to do that sometimes. I'm not pleasant to be around when I'm hungry.
I get it.
With a Snickers ad, right?
Me either. Okay, so 6 o'clock.
I have to
BZ.
say, and I'm gonna be the odd man out, I think that it's gonna be a problem when you ask the public to come to public hearings, because this is not just affecting us and staff, it is the citizens of Prairie Village. And a lot of them work, and a lot of them get off at 5:30, and then to get here at 6 or 6:30, it's almost impossible. And they need something to eat too, so, and I don't want them coming in cranky.
Right.
I don't want them cranky, I want them to be, you know.
And I don't
fed.
think anybody has strong preferences on what we do. The idea behind it was council meetings start at 6 with the committee of the whole, and then they meet at 7:30 for a council meeting, but most of their work actually happens from 6 to 7:30. So the thought was it could match that. There's really nobody cares very strongly other than the fact on nights like this, we're here really late, and staff that's stuck here, it's just Joyce and I tonight, but sometimes it's Wes, and we've got consultants here too, and it's Mitch, and we've been at work since 7:45 or 7, just like the rest of you have, and we all want to get home to our families. So that's the reasoning behind it. No strong feelings. We just wanted to get your ideas.
My feeling is I would love to get planning commissions down time-wise and, make them go faster. But, and I have to say, staff has been doing a really good job of doing the pre-meetings with the applicants and trying to narrow down some of the specifics, and I thank you. I mean, I think it showed this evening, because we could have been here for hours and hours and hours. And requiring them to have the meetings with the neighbors, I think it's really helpful. So,
I would just tell the applicants, look, we've read your stuff, right? So sometimes I feel like they get up there and they just want to read exactly what they've already given us. And that's a little frustrating, just because they're like, okay, I've already read this, you don't need to spoon feed it to me.
and that happened tonight. That happened tonight. Right. High level.
That's good feedback. I'll make sure I communicate that with the applicants in the future. So,
But I think that part of the problem is that like Tidal Way, that they have never been here before, they've never they didn't know what to expect and probably didn't know what we were receiving in our packet. Maybe they did.
And I think in that particular situation, when you're opening up something for a public hearing and residents, you don't know, you might get 10 residents up to speak against it. The applicant does deserve time to advocate for themselves because nobody else is going to do it, you know.
We give them time to come back and talk, right? So to me, that's a non-issue because, first of all, you can't prepare for something you don't know whether it's going to happen or not. And if I can avoid having someone tell me for 30 minutes what I already know.
Absolutely. I think we're all in agreement with that.
I've seen this guy get up and when we had Slim Chickens, and he said the exact same thing that he said tonight that he did in 2015, right?
I thought I was hearing the rehashing of Panda Express.
Yes, absolutely.
Some cities like Overland Park actually have a timer. I think they give you 4 minutes or something like that, and then
Well, I considered a 3-minute.
Olathe, yeah, they do that too.
I have. If I know that there's a lot of people here for something, I'll limit it to 3 minutes, but I knew that there was going to be a spokesperson for Homestead, so asking for the comments, I thought, and electronically, we can have them in our minutes or our addendum to the minutes or the comments or something.
Yeah, well, so if we,
got up and whined.
said they didn't want a left turn on Row, or, you know, it was just like, okay.
Oh, yeah.
so are we wanting to keep the meeting time the same then? Is that what I'm hearing? Or move
I
it
would
up
prefer it
a
at
half
7
hour?
personally. I think that just to get residents to come if you start, because even the city council, it's 7:30, and we're at 7.
Right, well, they start at 6 with committee of the whole, and that's where they have the majority of their discussion. They're basically not debating.
Yeah, but that's not
much
the
of their
public
stuff.
portion. The public portion starts at 7:30.
Well, a lot of the public comes at 6. Mhm. Yeah, I mean, the majority of their debate happens from 6 to 7:30, and they mostly just take action in the 7:30 meeting.
personally, coming from 2:10 and 4:35 to get here, I do not want to be late, and I have squeaked in 5 minutes early.
Well, let's not rock the boat then. I don't think there's
no,
any
I-
reason to change it unless everyone
Not
is
broke,
dying
don't
to.
fix it, right?
Yep. Okay, good deal. Next month we have just the applications that have been continued to March, and then a special use permit renewal for Queen of Paws Doggy Day.
What? Wow.
To
That was
pause,
brutal.
what did they want to do?
Up for renewal, and it's subject just to planning commission approval.
Very nervous. Yes, she gets very nervous.
There's people there, remember,
Hey,
Yeah, we don't think there's any site
The
plan approvals
meeting
in
is
the country.
adjourned at 10:04.
Hawks are winning or not?
oh, that's cool.
66. 2.5 left. Oh, wonderful.
He likes accounting and finance, so, which is an interesting group.
All of a sudden heard this like.
I thought I had the sniffles.
I knew exactly how you were thinking. It's like that.
You know, it's like Capra.
Inside jokes, huh?
He has a lot more personality. In fact, it's interesting. He works at Wonderland down at.
Oh.
Yeah, he's the sales guy.
Nice.
One of the sales guys.
Well, then I probably have interacted with him. Yeah.
No.
It's not gonna
Oh, I meant to.
no one's gonna build houses on that site. Like, what is gonna be okay for those people? Like a dilapidated old shitty building is not.
Here's actually, and I had taken up all my soapbox 75th and State Line, but I just felt.
Hi, that seems like all my clients.